A new chapter, a new interesting thing to learn, hopefully. And in this chapter, we are going to be concentrating on what the author calls focal points. And I believe focal points is a word that we can or have heard probably in being used many times in chess. Weak squares, squares that we want to attack, squares around the opponent's king that we can try to infiltrate on, weaknesses, but they can come in a lot of different sort of words. But the point, really, after we saw that last chapter, is these mating patterns. When we're trying to finish a game off or start an attack or anything that involves an attack, we normally base it around certain areas in our enemy's opponent's position. We try to work out a way into those areas, work out a way we can checkmate on those areas. And these are what the author calls focal points. So, one very basic setup, and I'm just going to make some random moves on the board here. And I haven't done very good moves here, but let's just play some very, very bad line that black could play in this position after castles. You could say that immediately, by the way, the Greek gift is probably very strong here, but you could also say that h7 in general is a focal point, because we're generally going to try to sack our bishop there, which we might better do now, or we could even bring the queen in there also to create checkmate on that focal point. And these are what the author describes, I believe, as mating focal points. And again, you don't really need to know the terminology, I feel. This is not so important, but it's to know the ideas. So you've got to try to work out which square you're trying to land the killer blow on. And then he goes on to say auxiliary focal points, which you could say that focal points are connected to the mating square. You could even say, let's just imagine that knight was moved to f8. You could even say that that's an auxiliary square, because the knight is defending on f8, that pawn, if it gets there. And therefore, if you can break down that square, you break down that square. So you have interlinking squares, interlinking focal points. And, this will be a network of squares you can break down. I mean, you could also say this is to do with checkmate attacking focal points. Lots of positional games, I think, revolve around what we could say is outposts, key squares. Key squares is, again, another word we could use. We could call them focal points. I mean, one very famous opening that Magnus Carlsen has been playing recently is the Sveshnikov. And one of the main things with the Sveshnikov is the d5 square. This square is a focal point, you could say, a square that most of the game revolves around, this one square. Can white take over it? Can black gain enough counterplay in, what we're going to call later on, this defensive, indirect defense, this counterplay against this idea of that square. So focal points, again, we'll look at them more. We'll look at certain squares, I think, to start with. And we're mainly concentrating with the most common setup. That is when one side castles, which happens in most games. So you can imagine the castle king over there. And we're going to look at these squares around the castle king and how different patterns, strategies can be used to checkmate on the checkmate focal squares. And hopefully this will help you plan your attacks better in future. So a standard way to look at focal points that can improve our game is to look at the standard castling position and work out which squares are going to be checkmate focal points and squares we should be aiming to come into. And in this one, we're looking at, the G7 focal point. We're looking at this from the white side. We have to look at it from one side, so it might as well be white. And the author does mention some quite interesting observations, which you might want to bear in mind. I don't know how much their practical use will be, but I think every little bit of hint we get should help us improve. And he goes on to say, in the castle position, the two main focal points of attack are h7 and g7. I think that's clear. h7 is the more common focal point that white attacks, because generally in the opening sequence, white's bishop will often come to d3, naturally pointing at that square. But then he goes on to say that even though g7 is not the most common focal point, attacks on that square are generally more successful than attacks on h7. This is general, not this position. And of course, every single individual case must be evaluated in an individual way. He goes on to say that attacks on g7 are more successful because black doesn't normally have any pieces defending that one, whilst h7 can be defended by a knight and can be defended in a much easier fashion. But of course, we're talking about castle positions where our opponent hasn't moved these pawns, where he hasn't fianchetto, and there are many individual cases. But let's start by looking at an attack on the g7 focal point, this position here. And you can try and work out what you think is the right move yourself here at the same time. I mean, again, to get into the mind of the right move, it's evaluating, working out what's important. This focal point idea comes into that evaluation and then basing your active play around that. So g7 looks like a main point of entrance because our knight is attacking it. We have a dark square bishop which can add pressure to that square, and our queen has swinging potential one of these two ways. Now, if we tried to attack that straight away, well, we'll look at that in a second, but can we go knight takes there? That would be one of the first things. Well, I think it's clear to see we don't need to move the pieces there, that after king takes, there's not really any backup because black's dark square bishop is a good defender of those dark squares. So this sacrifice is not working. The next thing I'd probably look at is what about creating an immediate checkmate idea? So queen g3, and this looks like a very tempting possibility, but we'd have to now evaluate black's best defense, which would be g6 here, and white should now try to avoid the main defender of black's position. Whenever you play a pawn move, it weakens the squares of the opposite color, the dark squares for black here, so you want to get rid of the one defender of those dark squares. Play bishop g5. After something like queen c5, knight f6, takes, black is going to play h6 and king h7, getting a defensive setup. And for that reason, the position is defendable for black. Black is only a little bit worse, nothing too serious. The queen can defend along here in some positions. And yes, white has advantage, but it's not serious. So if we go back to the original position, we know that queen g3 is a nice safe option to attack the focal point. There's no point looking at h7 as a point of attack because we can only attack it with our queen. In order to use a successful attack on a square, we're generally going to have more than one piece aiming at that square. So we need to arrange that situation. And here we should be looking at other violent ways of doing it. And it can then be seen, because we also have queen c3, that if we bring in our undeveloped piece, a piece that's not doing anything at the moment, the queen and the knight kind of are, so if we bring in the third piece, even in a drastic way, it can cause black some real headaches, as in he's losing. Now, in this position, he really has three options. He can try to defend that square, take the bishop, or move the pawn. And the first move you should always consider is what happens if he takes the bishop, because if we lose the piece, we lose the piece. And now you've got to find the right square for the queen. Now, queen g3 is not so bad, but black can block. Queen c3 is much stronger. Again, it's the focal point, but in this way, black can't block in an adequate way. Bishop here leads to knight f6 check, and you see these two pieces coordinating brilliantly. We can take that rook on the way. And after f6, we simply swing our queen now back, and we stop the blockading move. And this is clear to see it's leading to a winning position. The knight and queen coordinating. Black has to give a piece back, and we're still mating even then. You can look at that line yourself. So if we can work out that bishop h6 is good because black can't take it, if we can simply work out that we're not losing a piece, it should be clear to see that this is our candidate number one move, the move we should be looking for. Why? Because we're bringing in another piece, we're developing, we're applying pressure, etc., etc. And also, if you look at this more, we can see that black can't really defend in an adequate way. If he goes bishop f8, what do we play? What do we play? Careful, by the way. Chess is a hard game. Well, here we should play, and this was a bit of a trick, queen g3. If you were tempted into playing bishop takes g7, as I was thinking originally, this actually backfires. Not because of bishop g7, queen g3 and we're winning, but you weren't maybe looking at all of black's defensive resources. And after queen c5, all of a sudden the queen is attacking the knight. And this is not so simple at all here. You can actually be worse in this position because the queen also is coming back to g6. So bishop takes bishop, queen takes knight. And with queen g6 coming, this is all right. So the capture in this position, and we should always be looking at the most forcing moves. The capture is not the right way to play. Instead, we should now play queen g3, forcing g6. And now we rely on the combination. And this is another strategy. In order to work focal points, you've got to understand relationship between your attacking pieces. And knight and queen against a fianchettoed position is very strong, with either the queen coming in on that fianchettoed position, but even stronger here, the queen coming directly towards h7, and black is getting mated. So that only leaves g6 as an option, but this move has weakened the dark squares, and in this case, we've got another piece into the attack. Before that, in these positions, our bishop was on this square, and after queen c3, that extra piece gives us a winning position. f6 only moved to stop, and now we just crack through that position, and it leads to a winning structure. So a basic example of an attack on the focal point g7, which we've been told in this book has the greatest chance of success in a standard castling position from your opponent. Now, this strategy that we just saw it is something which I've seen occur in numerous examples, and this book was written quite a while back now, but still incredibly relevant today. And if your chess knowledge is vast, or even if you want to check these games out, I would recommend, with the same theme in mind, the focal point of G2 or G7, you check out the game Kasparov White versus Nigel Short in a Tarrasch French, where Kasparov plays bishop h6. Beautiful move. You should be able to find it if you do a bit of searching. Not in this course, so I won't be covering it. I'm just thinking, again, this is the way I try to use examples like this to improve my own chess ability. I look at examples in a book and I try to relate them to the experience, which I have to say has obviously been built up by 30 odd years of playing at high level. Well, maybe I wasn't playing at high level when I was like 10, but it was high for me at the time. Another game which springs to mind is the game Bodar Jabava with White in the Jabava London system, get the course, against FIDE or world champion or ex-FIDE world champion Ponomariov in the Olympiad last 5 years, I think. And in that game, Jabava played bishop h6 to focal point on g7. So already I'm trying to think of games when this sequence of events happened. The author now, I think quite wittingly, says the following: in order to not be unfair to black, who tends to suffer in books such as this. I kind of like that. And it is generally black, you know, many examples of black getting checkmated and black never has the fun. The author wants to show some cases where black is having the fun. This is a position from Correa, Capablanca, Buenos Aires, 1914. And again, we can see that here the focal point should be G2. Let's evaluate quickly, and I hope you can see why. White doesn't have many defenders around the king. Both in H2 and G2 only are defended by the king, but we are already attacking G2. Our knight is brilliantly, beautifully positioned. Our queen is hovering, and we got the third piece. Often 3 pieces is the magic number, and in this situation we have some ideas of trying to come in immediately with this move, but again, if white can play G3, white gets a defensive setup. So this doesn't work, and here, I hope you can see the move, do pause. Bishop to H3, yet again, is the move to work this, and to open up the king, bring the third piece in to stop the standard G3, because we win the exchange. We should be winning there, and it just breaks through in a very simple manner. Can't be taken because of the focal point of the queen coming in. The only other thing that white can try is knight E3, and now how would you play this position if you were black? Remember, white does have F3, so you need to make sure you do the calculations. But yes, we can play bishop takes G2 anyway. In the game, knight to F5 was played, which is paramount to resigning. If knight takes G2 is played, then this is another standard pattern that I've seen in many games. The author doesn't mention this, but a combination of queen and knight, when the opponent's queen is on this square, so in a discovered check position, and you have this pressure against G2, is a common idea. Because we're not just threatening checkmate, but after that is defended, we're threatening check and just picking up the queen, as black would do here. In the game, knight to F5 was met by bishop takes E4. Black also has a good rook, knight G3, knight H3, and another checkmate pattern has occurred here. Nice style by Capablanca, quite a standard checkmate on the G2 focal point here, which is obviously the mirror image to G7. So the author wants to prove that black can have fun in chess as well, and he uses this from a following game in the semi-finals of the USSR Championships 1944. Both strong players here. Bololevsky versus Umivstev. And black is to play, and black has a nice bit of pressure here. And I think it's clear to see that black is the one in charge. Now, the player of the white piece is actually a famous player around this time. Very good player. So this was a good victory for black. But again, if you look at the position, evaluating, opposite side castling, boom, attack. Where is black's attack? Well, it's not really on H2, is it? Because white's defending that by 2 pieces, and you can't get into that square with a heavy piece, a queen. It's clearly on G2 because we have the open file towards G2, the bishop towards G2, and we just need to find a way to either bring in reinforcements to improve the attack, if we can't do anything immediate, which we can't. So bring in reinforcements, get rid of our opponent's defenders, just look at ways to create threats that don't do anything too detrimental to our position. And here black comes up with a very nice idea, knight to E4. And this is now bringing in reinforcements through a tactical method. The knight is aiming to introduce itself into the attack. Yes, our queen is on pre, so it is quite risky play. I mean, if we go back here, queen c6 would have some ideas to it as well, with the idea of trying to, in this position, take here and go rook g8 with an attack. This is another, I think, idea, but it's not as strong as the move played, and white can hold off here with a move like g3. If this ever occurs, then, you know, this is still very good for black. The focal point is no longer, well, it could be g2, but there becomes another focal point, which is g3 now. Let's remember, it can be adaptable, and this might not be the best sort of continuation for white, but it demonstrates the idea that now that g3 is blocking our rook, we should look at that square, and we can apply pressure to that by moving the pawn and moving the rook. So we can sometimes we have to just switch our attention a little bit. Knight to e4, very clever though, and white now moves the queen, trying to exchange queens, ease the defense. Had white taken on b6, then knight takes d2 is breaking and forcing a way through to g2. You're literally getting rid of the pieces that are in the way of that square. And after this one, the attack on g2 is going to be crushing, and the rook can come around to h1. Here we see our bishop on d6 plays a very useful role in the position. Another very funny checkmate here, which I've seen used just to demonstrate checkmate patterns. This is one. And there is another one here. Can you see the other one, which I've seen before, I've used before? This one. And if king takes, we have this other rook and checkmate next move. This is another one to bear in mind. So now after after queen a5, black increases the pressure. Very clever move. And this is now using both the bishops and both the rooks, and white is not wasting any time. Again, it's time. When you're attacking, you want to play it as quickly as you can. Don't waste any seconds. And this is a great move because now again, if this is played, black has a very pretty checkmate. Can you see it? You should be able to work this one out. Very nice, using those cannonball bishops along the long diagonals. Rook takes g2, and now rook takes h2. And okay, g2 is the main focal point, but the squares around it are connected. It has to be captured, and now beautiful move. Knight takes f2, double checkmate, double points. You get 2 wins for that. You should do, really. So that's the threat. So after here, white goes knight to e1 to try and defend the focal point. But black's not having any of it. Rook takes g2. It's now time to break the nut. Knight has to take, and now we've got to get this knight out the way. So knight to d2, threatening this checkmate pattern of taking and coming to h1. The bishops really are like deadly archers on these diagonals there, cutting towards the king. Queen to d5, desperate. And the funny thing here is actually good we've got our queen facing off against the bishop. Normally in this game of chicken, remember the game of chicken where you have 2 cars? Well, I've never played it, but you have 2 cars. I think it was in Mad Max, and they're both driven by lunatics, and they drive straight at each other. And the first person to flinch is the chicken, or the sensible person, I say. Well, this game of chicken here between the bishop and the queen, normally the queen will have to retreat because it doesn't want to get involved with a mere bishop. It's much above a bishop's rank. But in this position, if white plays f3, which he'd like to play, black wins the game of chicken because you've got this killer move, the pin on the knight. Now, what else can be played here? Not really anything else. It's unbelievable. This is the only move. And now bishop takes d5, and we're threatening the same checkmate, the rook coming around. White tries desperately, pawn takes d5, but now just queen takes b2. And this is also something that you'll find occurs quite frequently. You start a very strong attack which your opponent desperately defends, you do not checkmate, but you get some tangible gain. Here, big material. You still have to win those games. It's down to you, so don't relax. When the attack succeeds, you have to polish off the games. And in this position, Black does that actually very simply by keeping the initiative going. And here he wins more material. White has enough. But that was, I think that's a lovely example, that one, of the power of the open file, rooks and bishops combined. Rooks and bishops combining, very dangerous in certain situations. So let's take a look at a full game where we see the build up as well, to the point where in this position, this game, Alekhine comes in on the focal point. So it's all well and good seeing, oh, that's the focal point. Let's see how we actually got to that focal point in one very big game with Alekhine leading our charge. So standard opening stuff, and nothing to report too early on. And here Alekhine plays bishop c5, and this I think has a couple of names. It's either, I think a while back the original name was the Muller variation. Muller, like that, reminds me of Muller Rice. Nowadays I've seen it called the Archangel variation. Also interesting to see such greats as Alekhine playing it, because bishop e7 combined with b5 is the more standard rule. Lopez played many more times. Kasparov, Karpov, nearly every world championships you see this, or used to. And bishop c5 was a bit rarer because the bishop was thought to be a bit more exposed here, and you're in a pinned position quite often. But it's funny that, Alekhine plays it here, and now there's a bit of resurgence in this. Caruana used it in the candidates. Other top players have been using this move more regularly. The bishop is more actively placed here, but it's a bit more risky to play in this way. Now, knight takes e5 is now played, and this is a variation which doesn't offer white really anything, but you've got to be a little bit aware of how to play this. There's still some danger here. This is a standard idea when the bishop goes here, as I'm sure most of you know. Knight takes e5. In continuation with white playing d4. And now the author gives the move knight takes e4 as an exclamation mark. But again, this shows you how theory has moved on. In actual fact, nowadays in this position, b5, as the latest analysis by the Chessable team has indicated, is the way to equalize. Actually, knight takes e4, the move played by Alekhine, gives white a chance to gain a big advantage. We're not that interested in the opening, but it's still interesting to see how things develop. And after bishop b3, black should now take on d4, queen takes, and just play d6. And black has lost the bishop pair, but some nice central knights, the bishop coming to this square. And there is a big idea, and this is a very standard trick in these positions, c5, c4, winning a piece, which will gain a tempo at some stage because white has to defend against that. So this is the modern treatment. Now, after knight takes e4, rook to e1 played. The bishop comes back to e7, rook takes e4, knight to g6. And here white plays knight to c3, which looks standard enough. But c4 is a much stronger move because the knight wants to come behind the pawn. And often a knight behind the pawn is much better than a knight in front of the pawn. If you look at many openings, you can see this is true because the knight will support the pawn, and the pawn is an extra attacker you have. And that's the case here. This pawn is useful. And with the knight coming here, the bishop transferring to this diagonal, a space advantage for white. Yes, it's a symmetrical pawn structure, but these pawns are very dangerous. White has a very nice game. Black quite solid, but a bit uninspiring. After knight c3, Alekhine castles, and now knight d5. This is white's aggressive idea. bishop d6, which looks a bit uncomfortable, but often this way of moving the bishop, as long as you can play c6 and move the bishop back and go d5, is playable. And the other way, because you've got to think about all your pieces, what about this poor little guy? The other way this can be played is by playing b5 and bishop b7. So the bishop here is a good piece. Queen f3. And now Alekhine played f5, which is actually a mistake. Now, in the original Art of the Attack, Vukovic gives b5 as the best move, which in some ways looks sensible. But after bishop b3, bishop b7, rather than this being better for black, as Vukovic says, with the move queen h5, it's actually white who is better. And again, this is modern day analysis. I think you can see that white's pieces are looking very scary for us. The main idea would be bishop g5 when f6 would run into this bishop, and we can easily lose quickly by moving our queen and then some white piece coming into that square. So this is very scary. So I can see why this is bad. Now the way you should play this is, again, as the chessboard guys have worked out, is with c6. This way of doing it. This is the other way you can get the bishop out. Get rid of that annoying knight. I don't like pieces in my own half of the board, especially when they're such powerful pieces in the center. Go away. Get rid of it. And then you can just retreat the bishop and play d5. And black is better. Now against f5, white now played bishop b3. Good active play. And Vergodchikov, how do we say that? Vergodchikov playing very well so far. And my Russian is not so great. Well, it's not there. You know, it's so bad it's not even a concept. And here black has to get his king out of this with an inferior position. It should be pointed out that he can't take on e4. Hopefully you can see why. This is actually a version of the, what was it called? The mate we saw. Can you get it for me, the name of the mate in the last chapter? I hate it when you can't remember words. It's after an opening variation and the player. What is it? What is it? Calm down, you will get it. It's a version of the mate on the H file. I'm going to have to cheat. Oh, his name's not coming up now. Great. I can't find his name. It's a variation. Okay, let's show you the mate first. Knight e7 check, knight g6. And this is a mate where you stop the king and you come in on the H file. And who was the guy? It's a variation as white, and we saw it in the checkmate section only a couple of videos ago. Give up. you can help. You're probably screaming at me now I know why you're screaming at me. It's frustrating. So Alekhine played king h8, and now the rook simply went back, and Alekhine thought, well, I've got to try to mix it with f4. In actual fact, queen h4 might just about be all right here, and why not? You can grab this pawn. It's quite risky because now white can get another bishop on the diagonal and the rook coming to e1, but the computer indicates it's just about okay for black. f4 played, and now c4. The author claimed this is a bad plan and suggested bishop d2 instead. But this, as John Nunn has shown in some analysis with c6, simply doesn't work very well either for white. So even though, you know, it's been commented and I said that white has an advantage, this is still not easy to prove. So c4 is still okay. It should have been played earlier, but it's still okay here. And now we have to get rid of that knight. And now c5. And again, this is where modern analysis chessable team with Vukovic disagree. This is actually the best plan still for white. And it should be, because there's no point retreating unless you have to. Let's go forwards. Taking here looks quite bad for black because look, this bishop here cannot get in the game. So black has to play bishop b8, meaning white's gaining time, and now knight b6. This must be good for white. And now Alekhine does a very practical move. This is what the top players do. You have to beat them so many times. When I played and won against 2600s, you get a good position, you get a good middle game. You have to win the game about 100 times. It's really frustrating. They keep finding tough defenses. If you move the rook here, this is just pretty helpless position. I mean, do we even need to comment on that? So the move black plays, d5, is much more to the point. And at least now, black is trying to get some attacking chances with the combination of his active pieces. And now white takes on a8, which is actual fact a big mistake. Had white got rid of this bishop, and it's knowing which of your opponent's pieces is going to be a key attacker, and I think here it was time to reevaluate. And we can see with black bringing in queen, knight and bishop, this bishop is really a key attacker on these squares. And had white realised how dangerous things become after this with some basic calculation, I think he would have whipped this one off. And then after bishop c2, claimed a big advantage. Without the light square bishop, black doesn't have an attack. I mean, you move the knight, I go here. It's just not happening. This is threatened. My light square bishop, I say my, the white light square bishop dominates. And this is really horrible. Queen h5 is coming anyway. We have our rook coming to the file, and there's not, this is queen can always come. It's really bad for black. So knight takes a8 was not sensing danger. And after knight h4, Alekhine gets some initiative. Big initiative. One move. Queen c3. Queen h5 would run into g6 and then knight h5. And the queen has to go to h3 and knight g3. You see the power of the light square bishop in action. One thing by capturing it would have stopped. But after queen c3, f3 is opening up everything. And just that one move really turned this game around. We can see g2, the focal point, but also h2. Rook e5, black tries to at least give some material back to stop that one. Black takes it, he doesn't need that bishop anymore. And now knight takes g2. Now what was better, knight or pawn takes? And if you think about this logically, one of those moves blocks the g file and the other move keeps the g file open. Taking here blocks the g file. And now g2 would not be a focal point of attack anymore. Instead, you could say f3 is, but it's not clear how you're ever going to arrange that with white being able to defend. By taking the knight, as Alekhine does in the game, he keeps g2 as a focal point because he can still hope to get a queen in on that square. Queen d4. Now, knight to f4 is actually even stronger here. And the point is bishop takes, the queen can come in. But queen d7, trying to come in on the focal point, is also very good because white's queen can't get over to defend. e6, queen takes e6, nasty threat. Bishop d2, and now it comes to g6. Again, keeping the focal point. And white is simply lost. Nice line. If king there, try and rook to g1. What should you play? Probably more than one move. But I like a move which threatens to come in on the focal point and stops rook g1, knight to e1, blockading the rook's defense. The game ended with bishop c2, but this is the same as resigning, and, well, now it's equal material, but white is still defending, and this is a very nice way to win. I mean, it's nice to see some flash moves at times, isn't it? And, well, okay, he's not going to get checkmate through this, but this is the next thing we talked about. If your attack develops into a big material gain, then that is also good enough for victory. It doesn't have to always be checkmate, does it? It can be big material gain. And after rook takes g6, Alekhine calculated that the following variation, which is forced, leads to that precise thing, and white resigns because he's exchanged and a pawn down. Not good enough against Alekhine. That nice play from Alekhine there. Smooth, nice, silky victory. Well, the game we're going to look at now is another Alekhine masterpiece. He had a fair few of them, that boy. This time against Lasker. So we did sort of talk about the history of chess development, and both of them world champions, and sort of Alekhine taking over, you could say, Lasker's throne with his more, I would say, aggressive, slightly aggressive, but controlled aggressive style. And Alekhine were the white pieces in this game. So another Queen's Gambit. We will have a lot of these in the course, especially this position. It is analysed, the middle games are analysed in some depth. And the continuation that seems to pop up most is certainly this Rook C1 move. And I think nearly all games we see in this line end very well for white. C6, one of the old main lines. And now white doesn't have so many more good waiting moves. You kind of want to wait until black takes here so you can capture in one move, but you have to play the bishop out at some point. And now we see a line with knight d5, which was played by Capablanca against Alekhine as well. And again, we saw that a little bit earlier in the course. The idea is just to trade some pieces, get to an ending, but it's not very ambitious. It's very defensive, and maybe this is where we can see the evolution that Alekhine with white, the more ambitious, or the player who, you know, has taken the game to the next level. Excuse me. Oh, the next level of sneezing. And, you know, away from Lasker, who developed the game a great deal, but here plays a bit too defensively. And now we have the capture on e7, and the move that Alekhine played against Kappa, knight to e4. You can also castle, but the ending with queen b4, which Alekhine had against Capablanca, is better for white. And white wants to avoid exchanging pieces because black's a bit more cramped. And I think this is a good idea. The kind of move we'd be happy to see would be f5. This may look like, oh, an aggressive move, scary, we've got to lose the tempo, but pawn pushes make weaknesses. So you've got to be very careful when pushing your pawn. And you know what? Even if I move the knight back to c3, I would be happier, because this pawn structure just seems a little bit weak. The only way I think you can make it work is by pushing one of them on again, but f4 meets e4. And e5 meets problems here. So f5 a little bit premature. The knight comes back, and now white moves the knight to g3, which seems often to be one of, I have to say, when I'm looking at a lot of Alekhine's games when he plays d4, one of his favourite squares. And it's more effective on this square when black has not fianchettoed, because that pawn controls it. But on g3, it has a lot of possibilities. I mean, one main break of black's is e5, and then we have the f5 square. So this manoeuvre, something I've learned. e5 played, and this is kind of like asking for that manoeuvre at some stage. Queen b4 would have been a sounder way to play. And again, this occurred in 1927 between Alekhine and Capablanca, which ended in a draw. But e5, okay, well, if we go here now, the check comes, but we have castles. And after pawn takes pawn, knight to f5. And this position has actually been reached by Max Euell a bit later on, and in the more modern era, Topalov. Topalov really fits in very well with this course. If you're looking for a player to replicate in a modern style as a great attacking role model, Topalov at his height in the modern era of chess, with computers being important, very good role model. He went with white nearly always for the attack, with black as well, and he did it in a very modern way, refrained, good analysis, but happy to sacrifice many exchanges, many pawns. So Topalof's a good role model if you want to improve your attacking chess. And they all play knight to f5, so this is obviously an okay move. Queen d8, and now the other knight comes in. And already it's clear white has a nice position because his pieces are much better placed, and we can transfer the queen over as well. I think this is another good plan. Black is trying to now do some exchanges, but white keeps that bishop. Black gets rid of one piece. And here the ending is still going to be a bit difficult for black. A knight on f5 is such a strong piece. Saying that, I would probably have gone for that ending, because the idea of this white queen getting anywhere over here at the right time is scary. And a knight combining with a queen is very dangerous. Queen b6 is misplacing the queen again on the wrong area of the board. You can see with a knight on f5, your king is a target always, so you don't want to draw your queen away to the other area. Another way that black could have played is if go g6, and after the knight moves, get that knight away from your king, and now put the queen on e7. And this is a much better defensible position. Maybe white would now try to get pawns to these two squares, but it's defendable. Queen b6 is wrong, and now the white queen is allowed in to this square with tempo. That knight has to go to a passive square. Knights sharing squares, Rowson talked about this, not pleasant, and now black is in a rather unenvious situation. Rook on fd1, and this is typical Alekhine, just getting all the pieces into the game. Rook ad8, and now the decisive battle for the focal point. There's no sacrifices, but the pressure increases. With a knight on f5, g7 is really weak. g6 forced, and now the white queen gets into those newly weakened dart squares. Light square pawn moves, the dart squares become weak. King to h8 is as good as anything, at least trying to attack the knight. If queen b5, trying to use some pin here, then white has a check, and he can now transfer ideas, and he can swap queens with the intention now of taking on f7. And this position here with rook c7 coming in is going to be very bad for black. Maybe black should have still tried this, because with the two knights there's some chance they can get tricky later on, but the pawns are going to suffocate, and white's rooks are very good. This is one situation, they do say the two minor pieces, like two knights, are better than a rook. That's very true in the opening and middle game, but when it gets in the ending, the rook is actually normally better than the minor pieces. It has much better range when the pieces can not always work so well together. So white clearly doing very well there. King h8, the knight now comes into d6 with a nasty threat. King g7, and now we've got to increase the pressure here with white. We've kind of done as much as we can with our pieces, so we need to look at ways to improve our pieces and increase the pressure on black's position. Black's position very bad. He has a lot of squares that he's forced to defend here. And the next move, e4, is a very nice move. Not only threatening e5, but also a standard swing of the rook to join in the attack. And now knight to g8, trying to defend, but here comes the rook. And you can see g7 is no longer the focal point. And again, this often happens. You pressurize one point, you make your opponent play a weakening move, and then you have another target to attack. And here f6, knight f5, and we have maybe one of the most famous little tactical endings here in a game. Can you see the move that's featured heavily in numerous tactical books? Queen takes g6, and actually now we go back to using g7 as the focal point. It never really moved away g7, but the g6 pawn became something we had to get through all around. And again here, this is a very, I think, appropriate end, because the threat is unstoppable. If you take the queen, the rook swinging rook is going to mate. So very nice game from Alekhine, and we've looked now a couple of games with g7 as the focal point. We will now move on to h7, which features quite heavily throughout this course, also in the next chapter as well. So we're moving on to a new focal point of the attack, not g7, but h7 and h2 in some situations. Now, the reason an attack on h7 or h2, let's stick with h7 as in this example, is less successful. Well, this is what the author says. Not sure I 100% agree, but the reason he gives is a very sound reason, is that the king has a much easier escape route, and the way of the king just coming towards the center like this, and his extra idea of coming to f8, when we compare a queen maybe trying to checkmate on this square or on this square, that extra option means that the checkmate ideas are less than they are on the g7 square. If we try to come into g7, the black king has nowhere to run to. On h7, it can often run this way. But he does go to point out that it's more common to start an attack on h7 because that's when white develops. The pieces are naturally going to be looking at that pawn. I always find in my own games, and this probably depends on the openings you play, that h7 often becomes a focal point of my attack in many of my games, often combined with a queen and a knight in these two squares. So it's worth thinking about this. You've got to think where your pieces are positioned, where your opponent's defensive pieces in position. And the next example here, just to start us off with h7 as a focal point, is, I think, quite a basic one. It's a little tactic with white to play and win in this position, which I think you should see. It combines not actually h7 on its own, but other weaknesses in black's position. Often the case, in order to win a game, you're going to need more than one weakness to come into. Well, queen b1 is really crushing it straight away. And the other weakness is the back rank, knight on g5, very well placed. Obviously, if queen takes queen, rook takes theirs, checkmate. And if black takes the rook, we take the queen. So the only way to try and defend here is, let me just flip the board back, I don't know why it sometimes does that, is queen, it's done it again, annoying. Okay, one more time. After queen b1 is queen to d7. And this is maybe the only slightly tricky position when we have to use the h7 square. And in this case, we are aiming to take away the king's escape route. So what move is the winning move now? Pause again if you need. It's the very nice move, rook e7. You're trying to blockade this route. If instead you played rook e8, well, now we see the king's most standard way of escaping this focal point. It just comes out, and white's attack has come to a dead end here. You've thrown away the win. But if you play rook e7, there's no way to stop the queen slipping into h8 now. It's impossible. Whatever you take with the queen's coming in there. So there we go. So that is some little things to bear in mind. Let's now move on to another game where we see the h7 square be a real focal point of attack. This is a fragment of a game between Szabo and Kotov. And what we're sort of concentrating on this game is the way, the idea of stopping mainly the black king coming this way, but also just following through with our attack of the focal point, h7, and those pieces of our opponents and ours, which are, doing their job on that point. So doing something connected to that point. And here you can see the knight on h7 is stopping our queen coming in. Now the knight and queen combined like this is probably, I would say, is it the most common or is it bishop and queen? It's either the most common or second most common attacking formation of h7. The other one is having a bishop, let's imagine on b1, where you have double power with bishop and queen. We look at this a lot more later. The queen in front of the bishop. This is the other main idea. The danger of having a knight on this square is that it can be kicked away. So h6, and if your knight has to move, what have you achieved? There's a couple of ways of dealing with this. One is to not castle, leave the rook on h1, play h4, and if your knight is taken, you take with a pawn, opening up your rook towards the focal point h7. The other one is to play something immediate before the knight has to retreat and you lose your initiative. That's the situation here. If you have your bishop on this diagonal, things are normally less urgent. And they're less urgent because black can't really do anything to force that double power away. So the kind of thing you're looking for with a bishop and queen on that diagonal is to force a move like g6 and then try to attack that square, often h4, h5. Some attack or sacrifice on that setup can also work. Now here there is a way we can try to get rid of the piece defending the focal point, a simple diversion tactic which I'm sure you will all see. So have a go at trying to find the move here. Pause if you need to. You should all find this one. We want to get rid of the defender of the focal point. If we have to move our knight, things have gone wrong. Knight d5. Creating a deadly threat, unleashing another bishop towards black's king, and most importantly, just threatening to take that knight. And it has to be taken. It can't be taken with a knight because of queen h7 mate. And now we just play bishop f6 and black's position becomes hopeless, with any capture on f6 leading to checkmate on the focal point. And the only chance is bishop f5, but it is inadequate because queen takes f5 and black now tries, for example, g6. I love the way the author, good old Vladimir Vukovic, he you know, even in these simple positions, he could have stopped, but he likes setting up even puzzle-like scenarios where the tactics even keep going on. And this is one case here. I mean, he could have stopped around here and just said, you know, bishop takes queen and this position is just winning. As it is, you're a rook up. But he likes the artistic side of it, hence the art of the attack. And he gives queen takes g6, which is very nice. And after pawn takes, bishop takes d5, and here, now bishop takes e7. And white's winning because the serious material advantage again. So, of course, there are cases where we just switch the idea around and you know, black's focal point on h7 becomes white's focal point on h2. And the following position in such a case looks like it's been a king's gambit here, some crazy g5 line. And black would love to play g3 and then queen h2. This is the main attacking idea. Sometimes bishop e5 followed by queen there. Without the queen h2 idea here, it's not clear how black is going to get any attack going. So we've got to try to arrange this one. So how do we do this? Well, the only piece stopping g4, and again, this is tracing back the connections to the focal point. This is one way of looking at a position in an interesting way. I mean, in this case, it's not a piece defending the focal point, but it's a piece stopping us coming in on that point, and it's the rook. So the rook is the key piece there, stopping g3, stopping our plan. So clearly, the rook is our target. So bishop e5, a natural move to try and get rid of the rook. And after d takes e5, we're going to achieve that by taking with the pawn. Now, after bishop e5, did white have any other moves? Well, d4 was possible, but we can now continue with our intended plan. We simply get rid of the rook, and we're now able to play g3. I mean, if you imagine white was able to play g3 here, white is probably better. We don't have an attack, and our king is in some trouble. But after g3, we have the entrance, and we can use that one let's say, like this, and we can develop, and we're generating very strong threats. And after some sequence with our bishop coming in, and now our queen diving in, we can see that white has to lose a piece, and with it, the game. So white kind of forced to play knight takes e5, but now, of course, we take with a pawn. Now, a lot of people might have been, thinking they'll bring the knight in. The knight's going to come in. Wow, yeah, into the king. Hey, here we go. Getting a bit carried away there. But that's not the essence of the attacking position here. It's h2 and g3. So taking with a pawn is the way to do it. And after rook f7, other options even worse. White might as well go active. g3 is now playable, and this is the key point. There's no point playing castle's queenside. I mean, your king is not in any immediate danger, and you're losing an important tempo. Some positions, the important thing in some positions is not going to be to get your own king safe. It's going to be to checkmate your opponent's king and finish the game. No reason to castle, you lose the tempo. Let's go g3 and just get on with it. We're threatening a series of checks here. Like the focal points in the last examples, our opponent's king does have the opportunity to run away, but it's going to become exposed for doing that. And now after queen f3, can you see another clever move here for black? And this is a very typical idea to create the mating net and stop the white king coming across to escape. It would love the white king to get to c2. Let's not allow that. It requires a bit of calculation. Bishop g4. And this is another case of not diving in without thinking. This is the kind of move a weak player would play. Patzer sees a check. Because after playing this, and after doing this, what have we done? We've actually helped white achieve what he wants to do. Our queen is given a couple of meaningless checks, and the opponent's king is escaping. You've got to be very careful when you check. You only check for a real purpose, like accelerate your development, or you're forcing your opponent's king into a bad position. Some reason behind it. The move bishop g4, much more to the point, and we wouldn't be able to play this unless the queen remains on its square. Now white has to try some checks, and after king d7, there's not enough checks. The black king is actually well defended. For example, rook f7, knight to e7. And here the white queen has to move. And this is the only way to try to hold on, because now the queen comes back to g1. And this is another case of not checking too soon. Because if we got excited and went here, after queen g1, it's game on again. So don't rush your attacks. We can think here, what is my opponent doing? Well, he's not really doing anything. He has one annoying check. I can always come back to this square there. His only defense is coming to f1, so the f-file is part of the process. I want to get a piece in the game. Let's get the rook in. If a check occurs, my king slips back. And after something like king f1, I can simply take here and, in this position, play rook f8, winning the game easily. So again, we see the focal point there. Little tips really is to trace back the square that you're trying to get into on the checkmate focal point when you get to that stage of the game, which is a bit later on. And in this case, it was actually the rook. And see how you can try to get rid of those key linked in pieces. Like a bit of coordination with the squares come to life then. And you will become better attacking player. Now, as a final sort of demonstration of this attacking idea on h7, and we're going to look at it again from the white side here. We go for the h7 square. Vladimir uses an opening variation, the Muller attack. Muller! And this first video is just going to show the build-up, a bit of opening theory for a change. Again, I'm going to go through it quite quickly, but we're going to get to the key position, and then we're going to look at some different lines in that position. Obviously, since the book came out, theory has progressed with computers, but it's still relevant to today. So the line in question is a line with bishop c4, c3. So the Italian was c3, knight f6, and now d4. And even nowadays, this is a very dangerous line for black, because white is forcing issues in the center, playing with tempo, and black has to be careful. Black has to now gain some time. If he starts retreating, white's position and idea has been a complete success. So he has to take and gain a bit of time with this check. Now there are some other options here. I think Lawrence Trent even played knight d2 and drew with Kramnik. It's surely his best result ever. I'm joking, he's a great player. Why does everyone have a dig at Lawrence? He's a really nice guy. He's a very talented player and he does a great job. So, you know, all credit to him. He's not a GM though, is he? But knight c3 was the old main line, because this doesn't interfere with the development of the bishop. And now theory gives knight takes e4, castles. And here, the main line of the Müller is taken on c3. And now d5. And this is sort of the idea that you stop black from playing d5. And you're trying to use your development advantage. As we saw right at the start of the course, the e file is open. So black's king could be a target, and we're going to win a piece back. If you had taken here instead, black gets d5 in when he's actually very safe here. He's going to get castled next move. So d5, and now the line we're investigating is bishop f6, rook e1, knight e7, rook takes e4, d6. You can have a look at the theory aspects of this yourself. I don't want to do an opening report. The course is big enough as it is, so it's a middle game course. You know, the openings are there on Chessable for you. And now, quick development, get the pieces in. And now, after knight takes g5, the line we are looking at is castling. The author gives h6 as being best when he says white is struggling for equality. And the point of this defensive move is that white tries to pile on the e file. Black has a very clever defensive strategy in this position. Can you see it? What is the defensive strategy here? Because white is planning to get a very big file. It is bishop e6. And if we take it, f6, black has blockaded not just the e file, but the diagonal. And he's blockaded it with his opponent's pawn, which is a very clever idea. But anyway, we want to get to the position where white now comes into the focal point h7. With knight takes h7, the queen swings in, and now rook to h4. And h7 is one, h8 is another focal point. They're both mate. And we're now going to look at this position a little bit more depth to see if black can defend. White is trying to checkmate. Is it defensible? And the thing is, as we've seen in a lot of positions, the main defensive technique for black is what we're going to look at later and call the self-defense king. And that is when the king tries to look after itself by running to f7. That's a standard approach to meet this check on h7. So f5 would be the first move we look at. And now queen h7 looks natural. Also, there is a funny move, rook h3. But we'll have a look at these positions. And the main position we're going to look at in the following little videos starts around here. So we've gone through the opening stage, but of course it's useful to show you how this position has occurred in case you want to do your own research and what is a very fun variation. So this position, which we saw the moves leading up to it, is analysed in The Art of the Attack, just to demonstrate some of the ideas based around the h7 square. And you can have a guess here if you want, whether you think the position is winning for white or drawing. I can let you know that a draw is quite likely with the queen coming backwards and forwards, but is there any way to win? And the answer is no. It's a draw, according to the analysis in the book. And I think we can see this quite close, because obviously white has two very big pieces attacking a king, which is quite cut off, and potentially another piece coming in. But we can also work out that with this important escape square, black has very good chances to survive. And this is the key point of the h7 attack. We can also add that black has a couple of pieces defending, which are quite handy, and it's only two pieces attacking. 3 would often be the magic number. And the first move we're going to look at is queen to h7, and this has apparently been tried out in numerous games, but it only leads to a draw. Not much choice here. King f7, and now rook h6, a flash move there. And this has actually got the intention, or it's quite a quiet move in the midst of a storm, which is quite, I like these moves normally. Reminds me of a very famous Macau Tau game, if you can remember this game where he brings the rook to h6 and a Sicilian. And it's to stop black trying to get his pieces into defensive setup with knight g6. And these kind of moves are very clever normally, in that when you're attacking, you're obviously just looking at the right way to proceed with your own pieces. But often, stopping your opponent getting a defensive measure in is key to the attack, and you can take a quiet move to do this. If we played rook e1, which is very normal, then knight g6, and if we now try rook h6, the black queen comes over here, and white is losing in this position. So it's important to stop knight g6, and there's no really immediate threat even. I mean, white's idea is to bring this last piece in, even with swinging it around. But after rook g8, a bit more defensive measures, rook e1, queen f8, black manages to get an idea, a draw setup, and an idea even of putting the king on d8, get that further out of the way. This is better than king f8, which gets in the way of black's pieces, and the king is not particularly safe there after white simply retreats. White has a lot of pressure, and this position is better for white. So queen f8, and now bishop b5 is a key move to try and stop the king escaping, and white just about holds the balance here. Rook to h8 is now considered to be the best move, and black is trying to exchange this rook for this rook very cleverly by getting the queen off this file. Other moves like c6 are weaker, because now white can put the bishop on e2. And the difference is that the king tries to come to e8, which was the reason to play bishop b5 now. We've invoked a weakness in black's position, and our rook can come over and take that, which is very useful. So rook h8, and now after queen takes h8, pawn takes h6, queen h7 check. You can't go queen g7 because a rook takes knight, a simple tactic. So king f6. And here black is ready to exchange queens with queen g7. Maybe not now because we go queen takes queen, but at some point. And also we're ready just to start kicking. Maybe the best strategy here, actual fact, is to start kicking this piece back with c6 and then bishop d7, etc. Get the rook over. So here, white should force the draw with rook takes e7 and now queen takes h6, leading to a perpetual check with best play. This king just going backwards and forwards. So an interesting draw there, some interesting little techniques there, but it seems that black has enough, certainly in those lines. Let's look at some other tries that white can play in the position. Going back to this key position where we just looked at the probably most forceful move, queen h7 check, Keres found another continuation here, which is enough for a draw, or so it seems. Even though with new computer analysis, that may not be true. And again, this is why these opening variations, it's totally different game nowadays. You see how much work has been put into this position. Keres analysing it for serious amount of time, other people. You put it on a computer, even one on your phone, 2 seconds, you get the answer. It's how chess has changed. And you've got to use that yourselves. Don't use the computer to tell you how to play your own games. It's not going to do that. People get far too obsessed with their computer. You won't ever get better. But if you do use your computer, if you're doing a bit of opening study like this, you can save yourself hours of work, but only when you're trying to memorize lines, etc. I'd say computer is useful, not to tell you your plans. It can't do that. That's what these videos are for. And these videos are hopefully going to get you to be a better attacking player. And Keres's idea was rook to h3. And this has the advantage of allowing a rook swinger, mainly, after a check. And also, there's some ideas with g4. Some ideas with rook e3 as well. But Keres's original assessment, which was all moves apart from f4 here, lead to a big white advantage, are not even true. 21st century computers say that bishop d7 and even rook e8 keep the balance. But they do claim, unlike Keres, that the position is equal, that black is better after f4. And this is a very normal move. I mean, it's a bit like that Alekhine game we had, where the bishop is now released, the knight has this square, the rook has this square, and we're threatening the rook on h3 at the same time. So white has to try g4 here, otherwise nothing makes sense. And this move has stopped white's rook occupying these squares. And now black takes on this square, and we're attacking the rook again. Given a chance, we will cover our focal point by playing bishop f5. This is a very often hidden way of covering the focal point. I've fallen for that before. So we have to check. And now queen h5 is the best chance at getting a draw. When king g8 would get the draw, but latest developments have shown that g6 is better for black. And again, this is just going to show you the difference in analysis going to the days of Keres to the modern era. With queen h7 check coming, king here, rook takes g3. Keres says that white stands better, which I can understand from a point of view. It looks very dangerous. And this is the difference between modern era chess and the games of the world, the world champions in the Keres' era. With the rooks coming over here, it looks very scary, open file, but the computers can find and tell you the real assessment. And either with rook f7 or even queen d7, they come to the conclusion that black is just winning. That's how great they do. You can try it yourself. I mean, to be honest, if I was playing this position, I want to work out why these moves are winning for black. I wouldn't just stop there. We can try to work it out ourselves. I guess some check, and now king d7 even. And we have, against a check here, a piece coming to f5. And I want to go c6 and run away, or do I? Because my rook. I mean, even here, I'd want to, do my prep. Maybe the idea is queen f8 and king d8. Okay, so what I'm doing here, I'm trying to work out the computer's idea in human terms. So if you do use a computer, try to do it in human terms. So this rook h3 move, modern assessment, not good anymore. A couple of other ideas have been tried. One such idea is bishop e2. And again, all these tries are quite logical. The bishop is trying to come to h5. White is trying to get the third piece into the attack. But now rook to e8 is the right defense, with some ideas putting the king on f8 and the knight on g8 to cover squares like that. And then the queen can come to, for example, f6. We also have an idea, if white tries this plan of moving the bishop in, playing just knight g6, and this is winning for black. Everything's covered. The queen is coming here. So you can see, if the actual idea doesn't even work, then bishop e2 is bound to fail. Rook e1, maybe the best chance, bringing the last piece in. But now, the best idea is actually bishop d7, given by the author here, with the idea king g8 and knight to king to f8, knight to g8, and black is able to untangle. Another line, king to f8, is also probably good as well. Even it's just best to get this developing move in first, and this move does allow bishop to b5. This is the problem, and let's just check this one. Bishop d7, and now rook e6 is one flash line. Bishop takes b5, rook f6, pawn takes, check, here, check. The whole idea, bishop e2, doesn't stack up here. It never gets to h5, so it's a faulty concept. So the last attempt we're going to look at is another logical move, and the last logical move here, if you can't checkmate with the pieces that are attacking, you bring in your reinforcements, and the only one we haven't tried bringing in is this rook to e1. Now, if it is white to move here, I would be very surprised if black can now survive with this rook even coming across, or the queen coming in and applying pressure like we have done in some of the other lines. But black can now play a very clever move. Can you see the best move for black? Knight to g6. And this is a very nice defensive move. And the point is, if the knight's taken, we will take the rook on h4. So the rook has to move, otherwise it's lost. And this is a very important tempo lost by white. In such a situation, any tempo lost could be very bad. And now black's position is winning with correct play. And here, we've got to be a little bit careful with black of rook e6. So if we play the normal f4, now that the white rook is here, rook e6 has that clever idea of trying to take away the escape square, which is key to our focal checkmate on h7, the focal point checkmate. So this is not the way we should play. Instead, we should play rook f6, defending the knight, and this rook acts as a very good blockader. Another piece just comes in to support our king, which can tuck in behind it. And what here should white play? Well, rook g3 is considered probably the best move, the best try here. Rook e6, for example, this aggressive try doesn't quite work now because the bishop takes, and here the king can try to travel to e7. And this is not working. If you try queen h7, well, now the same sort of thing after this one. In actual fact, here, probably the best move is now knight to f8, which comes back to a very good defensive square, as we know from before. And we have g6 to stop any checks. This should be the easiest way to win. No point getting involved taking that one in this situation. So rook g3 is a try to at least put the pressure on. And now there's only one reply, but it's a good one. That's all you need when you're defending. So rook e1 is actually one of the trickier moves, but it's not good enough. And the reply is knight to e5, blocking that rook. If black tries king to f7, which may look natural, now rook to e6, there's one of the whole points of this rook e1 move is in white's favour. White will win back his sacrifice piece with the attack, because g6 is dropping in these lines now. For example, bishop takes, pawn takes, king e7, rook takes here. And okay, we're exchange down, but this has some initiative here. Well, that's what Vukovic said. He said this line would be winning. But even here, actually, I'm not so sure myself. Can't you take on g6 and go queen f8 and try to play like this? So even this is maybe not even good enough. Okay, knight e5, given as the only move, but maybe not. And after something like f4 here, the knight finds f7, and it's a good defensive square, stopping anything coming in. And if white tries to play on the e file, just bishop d7, and everything is covered. And in this position, we can aim to play like rook f8 even, and queen f8 and rook e8, swapping pieces. And if rook e7 is tried, then knight to h6 is a good move, followed by rook f7, defending everything in a very good way. Very good defensive play there, actually. It's worth looking at that again to see how black manages to maneuver his knight around to defend all the threats adequately. So, not really working the Müller attack. Certainly not good enough for a win. If you need to get a forced draw, it might be okay. So, moving on, we now have a look at another so-called focal point, but Vladimir does point out in his book that this is what we call an auxiliary focal point. When we're attacking the castle king, the two squares we're trying to land that checkmate on normally are g7 and h7, and we've seen some great examples of this. And he calls the square f7 against the castle king, the normal setup, the auxiliary focal point, meaning that you're very rarely going to checkmate your opponent by landing a piece on that precise square, but this square can be used in a number of ways to draw the opponent's king out, as in this game, Tyler Koltanowski, 1930, or in some other way, like we've seen in some nice smothered mate ideas where a knight lands there. And it becomes much more of a target to attack, obviously in the castle position, when a rook moves away from that square. So the main point of attacking against m7 is really when we have a good diagonal towards it, or in some sacrifice which draws our opponent's king out. So we're not going to checkmate on that square, but it's the start of an attack, as in this game. So in this game, we had, well, what is now considered a bit of a Jabava London, but in actual fact, with a knight on f3, it's not a pure Jabava London, by the course, if you want to learn that opening. It's more of what we call a Barry. And it quickly transposes into a Philidor. I was going to say Black Lion, but that's when black plays these two moves. So we don't quite get that one. And this is now a position where my Black Lion course recommends you go c6 as black with h6 and g5. But after castles, normal move, queen e2, black gives up the center. I've never liked this way of playing. When I studied this opening from the black side, which I did extensively for the Black Lion course, I did look at some lines which some grandmasters played where black took here, but it always seemed to me that black was just worse. Not, because you give up the center, you're a bit more cramped, and your only chance is to play against the e4 pawn, but that doesn't always work. And here, Koltanowski played the standard idea, rook e8, but this was an immediate mistake. And the answer we will see soon, but maybe you can work it out. He's weakened this sort of auxiliary focal point, and how can white go for that square and continue? Not just go for it, but continue. And do remember, when I'm talking about focal points, this is the terminology used by the author. I mean, there are other words for it. I mean, a simpler word is just weak squares. Weakened squares is the sort of modern terminology. So have a pause now. The first move may be easy, but it's the second move which is hard. This is a bit like a game of Bobby Fischer's, which maybe I'll better remember and show you. Bishop f7, drawing the black king out into the open. So we're not finishing the attack here, but we're starting it on this square. So whenever we have control of this diagonal and our opponent's rook moves away, we should always be looking at this f7 square. And after king takes f7, the next move is very clever. Something like queen here check is really not that clear, because black has d5, and if you take it, just bishop d6, and the king can run back. Piece up. So the move that is important is knight e6, and this little follow-up move, again, I'm going to try to find or remember this Bobby Fischer game at the end of this one, because it's a tactic that has been played before. And it has to be taken, otherwise black loses the queen. And now we've drawn the king out even further. And now we can go for this check. So before, black could play d5, and in this position, well, he has no choice. He has to play d5 because king here is met rather embarrassingly by f4. So d5 played, and the point now is we gain this tempo, so black doesn't have a chance to put his bishop here. Where does the king go? It's dead wherever. If it comes forwards, queen f4 mate. If it comes to f5, slightly better, but queen d3 is stopping it running back home. This is very important in a king hunt. Don't allow your opponent's king to run home. King d6 runs into this one, and rook e1, and this one, and this one. Whoa, this one. Clear, the king can't stay in the middle of the board. So the king has to try and go back. And of course, now d6 check. And the problem here is we're just going to go pawn takes c7 and we're winning the queen. We don't even need any fireworks. So black tried knight d5, but this is clearly bad. If king f8 trying to run home, then d takes c7. Black's only tries to move the knight to get the queen out. But after taking there, we get another queen and we just retreat our second queen with a winning game. So knight d5, and now just pawn takes e7, not rushing capturing this one. Rook takes and knight takes d5. White is a pawn up with the attack. Pretty good, that is. And look how this file has this diagonal, should I say, has always been the winning factor, starting on a focal point. Now let's see if I might not be able to get this right, but I have a brief recollection of a famous game, Bobby Fischer versus Reshevsky. And Bobby Fischer wasn't really around during the making of this book. And it was something, now I'm probably going to really mess this up, and this is just an addition. And again, what I'm doing, I'm memorizing patterns where I've seen them before, because then I will be able to use them better. It's one thing being taught knowledge, being, here given the knowledge in a way, but you've got to apply that knowledge. Otherwise, you're never really going to get the most out of this course. You'll probably forget a lot of things I'm getting across to you. So go and just try to apply some of the things in any way you feel it will help you. I'm probably not going to remember this at all, but let's have a look. It was something like, I don't know, rook here, b6. Something like this. So, not this, but it's something like this. King takes, knight here. And after the king took, I think Bobby's Fischer queen was somewhere else, so we had a check here. But it's the same principle of taking there and knight there. You can go and look that game up. I didn't realise, I only thought of this pattern halfway through there, even though I've prepared the game, which often happens in chess. Thoughts prop up when you're actually playing the moves on the board. But I'm sure you might know the game. I think it was Fischer-Reshevsky, very famous idea. Let's move on now to another game. We're looking at that f7 square again, and we're using the game Byrne versus E. Cohen, 1912. And here, again, new analysis by the Chessable team differs from the assessments that the original author, Vladimir, gives. Vladimir states that knight takes f7 is not correct. And he goes on to tell a story about Byrne, who had a reputation as a super solid player, not taking any risks. And he goes on to tell the story that people mentioned this was the only sacrifice he ever played and in his whole chess career. And he goes on to add that even then it wasn't the correct sacrifice, it was a faulty sacrifice, basically implying that he wasn't a very sacrificial player. But modern analysis shows that Byrne was right, so Byrne gets the last laugh. Well, hey, good on you, Byrne. And again, the focal point is to draw the king out, and it's to me, it's very understandable that this is a winning move, because we're looking at the pieces. This bishop, very dangerous. Bishop here, good. Rook here, good. Queen coming in. So we've got 4 pieces attacking. Yes, black has a number of defenders, but they're kind of not coordinating the way they should do. So a move to break down black's defense, such as this, should certainly be considered. I would also be considering an exchange sack, bishop takes, rook takes here as my second option, and that may also be very promising. But knight takes f7, going for the auxiliary focal point on f7 makes a lot of sense. And now the king has to take it, and the point is queen h5 check now. And here king g8 was played, which makes things a little bit easier for white because white would attack with a tempo. A better move would be king to f8, and this is where Vladimir in the actual book, after king f8, let me just get that one, after this move, he basically goes on to say in this position that the attack is not quite working, and he only gives the line here, which was played in the game, of white taking on f6 and trying to bust through on that square. And that doesn't work. So the line which he gives here is bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, and now queen takes h7. But after this weird rook on a c8 move, he comes to the conclusion quite soon that white's attack is not good. And I say weird, but it does stop the one threat of rook takes f6 and queen takes c7. So king f8 may be a better try, but of course we don't need to release the tension in this position by capturing on f6. And as we've seen before, sometimes a quiet move is the best way to do it. You should play the forcing move if it leads to something concrete. So force the opening of the position. But if it doesn't lead to something concrete and you still have a promising position, as you should do with so many pieces, then look for other options. And here a quiet move, because actually if we think again, can we do a quiet move? Well, black's not really threatening anything here, is he? Because now the knight is in the pin, so it can't take our queen. So yeah, we have time. And the quiet move, bishop takes h7, getting rid of a defender and threatening bishop to f6, let's see this auxiliary defensive pawn has gone, is going to be working very well, and it should be winning. For example, knight takes g5, queen takes g5, rook on a d8, and now we can use the center. And again, it's very important when you have a center to use that center to attack with and cover squares. And d5, e4, covering d5 is the main reason, but also it's the battering ram, which black can't really stop to save the piece. So white will get the piece back with the attack and what I would consider a winning position, because the black king is much weaker than white's and it's going to struggle to survive after bishop h6. And even f6 taking here a couple of times is very dangerous. In the game, king g8 was played, and now in this situation, we can go for immediate violent action because we're going to gain an extra tempo on those lines we looked at. And of course, if you can win by the most violent measure, you should do, because you're forcing it. And you're not, quiet moves can backfire. You don't know exactly how it's going to end out always. If you can win for a series of captures or checks, you do that. And after bishop takes, this extra tempo helps. And now, after this move, d5 is key. That's actually, I made a little mistake there when I said rook to c8 was stopping rook f6. I should have added there, it was stopping rook f6 after this d5 move as played in this game here. And now if the knight moves, we take on f6, so black has to lose a piece. And when he does lose the piece, white's attack still ravages the position, because the black king is in a weak position, weak spot. And here, white plays the simple bishop g6, and white has this nice real attack on the king, and he'll win an exchange, because if that rook tries to move, let's say somewhere there, or d8, we can take over another file. The white rook's very strong, and, well, there's no defense now. In this position, if you try queen g8, then rook f6 and queen to e7 is mate. If the queen tries to do a little counter attack here, then we can now force it again, and we got this check. That's pretty terrible, and you can see in all these lines black is struggling. So Yeah, it was tough there for black always, but there was an interesting mix there between the quiet move and the forcing move. In one variation it worked, in the other not so successful. Well, we're just switching the board around here. Rather than it being f7 a focal point, it's now f2. This position occurred in the game Najdorf versus Eekhoff from the first round of the Mar del Plata tournament, 1955. It has a variation of the King's Indian Defence named after it. And here, black's move did quite a powerful sacrifice on that auxiliary focal point to obtain 2 pawns and a good attack against the opposing king. And this position does look like it's even come from a King's Indian Defence. This sacrifice clearly looks dangerous because black has this pressure against f2. White's rook has moved away from that square, and white's last move is kind of asking for it. With this knight, the only piece holding it up in the center, holding the attack up, but black has other pieces to join in. So this one is one of those ones where it's not going to have you're not going to be able to see a clear conclusion to the sacrifice. So you have to go with your own judgment. And you should have maybe assessed this position where we're threatening to take here, bishop b2, and decided whether you think this is worth it or not. And it looks to me totally correct to play, and it is according to the computer. Why? Because white is so pinned down. It's not just our pressure. We don't have necessarily any immediate threats, but it's the fact that white can't move. He can't really move this knight because of this one goes. He can't move this knight. He's defending everything. And as black, we can improve our pieces. And after knight c5, aiming for knight e6, we're doing just that. So we have all the pressure. We have the initiative. We can easily attack. It's a lot easier for us to attack than it is for white to defend. And that's the key point. Even if you can't work it out, you have to go with your instinct. Is it easier for me to play on my opponent? I've got all the pressure. Let's do it. White finds the only defense here in the position. And it should be pointed out that king f3 is rather a ridiculous move here. And it is given by the author, but I don't think anyone would play such an idea if you've got a safer option. And after knight e6, black is opening ways for the queen and for some nasty ideas over here. For example, knight c2, check, king g3. Let's keep forcing it. And this one works very well because we're trying to get the queen in here if the king moves back with ideas of knight f3, and f3. So knight takes f4 played, and now we can draw that king out even more. And I think it's clear to see with the queen f2 coming, this is horrendous for white. So king g1, good defense by Najdorf. Knight e6, putting the pressure here. And Najdorf correctly gives back the material. This is a wise choice, correctly giving back the material. And this is the way to go. Knight takes d4, knight takes d4, and black even has to be a little bit careful here. Rook takes d4 gives him very adequate play. If he goes rook takes e1 here and takes on d4, it's now white who gets a counter-attack with a brilliant idea here, which Eekhoff obviously saw. What is the brilliant idea? Using this pin on the king, queen e3. And all of a sudden it's white who's winning in this position. Black's king very exposed now. c5 forced, but after queen e7, white's pieces are flooding into the attack. So instead of doing that, rook takes d4 is better, and black gets to this position where I would prefer to be black here. It's equal material, it's exchanged down, but black's bishop can sit very nicely in the center, and black can centralize his pieces and eventually start pushing his extra pawns. And when you're exchanged down, you want to make sure your opponent's rooks can't get on the open lines. And in this position, it's very hard for white's rooks to play. This check can easily be kicked away, and as soon as we get our bishop to e5, those rooks are not going to be able to enter. So very sound sacrifice. You have to have a little bit of faith at times. It's not always going to lead to a win, but it's more fun to sack than not sack, isn't it? That's the truth of the matter. Another demonstration, I guess, well, the last demonstration here of this auxiliary focal point, and this is actually a consolation match, I think, between Janowski and Solen Tokov. Don't make their names easy for me. And Lasker and Tubenhos. So it's a bit of team chess going on here, but again, we have quite a different opening for a change now. We have this gambity line, the Danish gambit, and the point of this c3 is to get very quick development with bishop c4, very popular at club level. It's actually funny that when I was a junior, my friend told me about this gambit. I must have been like 9, something like this. I gave it a go as white. So I got this position, not knowing any more theory. And my opponent banged out d5. And this is a safer option in the game. When I was a junior, it's like I was 9 years old. I didn't know what I was doing, so I thought, what's he doing? I took this one. He played knight f6, and I went, oh yeah, I didn't do that, but I was like, bang, look at him, I won your queen, and this is actually just theory. He took there, I won his queen, looking like, yeah, man, and then he went check back, and I'm like, ugh. And I found out that I could actually play queen d2, and it wasn't the end of the world, and this is actually one of the main lines, which leads to a roughly even position. Actually, in that sequence, after knight to f6, there's a very nice trick here that you can play, and the trick is knight to c3, with the idea if black gets rid of your strong bishop and plays c6, white has a winning move. Can you see the winning move? Knight to f6 check. I've won a lot of games online with this trick, and the point is, after pawn takes, we take on f6, take the queen, take here, take the rook there. So, all okay. Now, knight to f6 was played in this game. And this is nowadays an okay way to play, but you have to be a bit careful here. You're being a bit greedy. You're not accelerating a development. And after e5, there is some risk. Bishop b4 check, knight c3. And now the next move is clearly a blunder. We've seen this before. When one side gets a pawn to e5, in a dangerous position, black needs to respond with the counter-strike d5. This is nearly always forced. This gets some development from, the side who is behind with that bishop flying out, and it gets space in the center. So this was needed. Now, after queen e7, white played knight e2. In actual fact, queen e2, again found by the chessable team, is just very good, breaking the pin. Nice advantage to white. Knight e2, black now plays another mistake, knight to e4. And this leads to the exchange of the only 2 minor pieces that black has developed, which can't be a good thing. Black should have, just gambled and taken on e5, Your position might be bad anyway, just take another pawn and fingers crossed pray. Obviously, white has very good compensation here with open lines and the simply castle king. Now, after knight e4, white does castle, and now knight takes c3. And here, it was best to play knight takes... let's go there. After knight takes c3, it was best here not to play bishop takes. If we compare the 2 dark square bishops, actually r1 is better. We're happy to exchange off that knight, which is a defender of the king. But I like our bishop, so why not take the knight? Because we also had the threat of coming in. So this was obviously a more sensible option. Couple of mistakes made here. Team games, it always happens. Bit of bickering, arguing. And now black plays another slight mistake, because this again accelerates white's knight. Black should have just castled here. And in this position, he does castle, but now knight d5 is very annoying. And even though white's 2 pawns down, all of white's pieces are very well developed here. Black grabs this pawn. If he doesn't grab the pawn, white can start throwing the pieces over. And you should know by now some attacking methods. One would be the rook swing, with either hitting the focal point g7 or h7. And another one would be just pushing the f-pawn up. And I would not like to be black here. All those queenside pieces are asleep. So he does grab the pawn, allowing another tempo move. The queen comes to d6. And now in order to create a deadly attack, you need to include your most powerful piece. So queen h5 played. And now another too slow move. This is just too slow. This is understandably criticised. Black had to, at least in this little sequence, try and develop a piece. Now, this is actually not so clear again. I mean, computers always find ways to defend, but I would certainly, in a practical sense, prefer to be white after a typical rook swinging idea here. The one thing that Black's got going is he does have the queen to defend, worst case scenario. So Black is under pressure here, but he's still surviving. And if he can survive, he's got the pawn advantage. You can't lose as many tempos as Black is losing with c6. And what is the correct move now? Can you see the little sequence that might work? There could potentially be more than one good move, but what is the simplest way to use this focal point? And we can see here, we have pieces attacking that. There's an open line. This is why that focal point is important. Well, knight c7 is the most simplest. Picking up the rook, and we're going to see what happens if that is taken. I was also wondering about knight e7 check, but after king here, Black has some chances to defend, I feel. We can take this one, though, with knight here check, and it still looks very unpleasant to me. I might have even tried, rather than going with my knight that way, go towards the thing I want to kill. But after knight c7, Black can't take this one because of this common tactical idea, checkmate. And again, we use that auxiliary focal point. So Black tries g6, queen h6, and now he takes here. But again, we can use that auxiliary focal point to start to pull our opponent's king out. Often the way it's used by bishop takes f7. And what we're going to see here, obviously rook allows a back ranker, pulling the king out to take that pawn on h7, which is undefended, is one of the more common ways we combine an attack on the auxiliary point. And after king f6, queen here check is actually quicker, but queen h4 also does the job with the idea of bringing the rook in. I mean, Black is sleeping over here, so it's not going to be defensible. Queen d4, king f8, and a very nice finish now with queen h8. And after rook e1, the king gets checkmated on e5. And it was commented that Lasker actually came to grief in several games against Janowski through accepting sacrifices against his own principles. Lasker wanted to, modernize the game by playing very solidly and also not taking everything that his opponents would throw at him, improving on Morphy's opponents. But against Janowski, he often went against this rule for whatever reason. It's said that maybe he was riled by a touch of, annoyance sometimes in this opponent. And I think we all know certain players who can rile us, and maybe this was a tactic that Janowski used to his benefit in their individual encounters. So we've already come across, why do I always say so at the start? I'm sorry, but it's just built in that's my sort of cue, as I've mentioned before. So. Maybe I'm just a massive Wesley So fan, who knows? Anyway, we have looked at the idea of one focal point moving or drifting into another focal point. And I find when I'm attacking, I don't actually think of things in focal points. It sort of, you don't say, oh, there's a focal point there. But you do have the idea of weakened squares. And you know the square where you want to checkmate on, and you start building your attack around that square. And often that square will change to another square, because if your opponent is able to defend one square adequately, another one becomes weak because they move their defense away. And we've already discussed this. It's just natural attacking and defensive manners that if you keep the pressure on, they're going to weaken some other parts, and then you come in on that part. And Vladimir goes on to talk about this, and he calls it complex focal points. Now, I would just say weakened squares, a number of weakened squares in the position. He says this is, with a couple of examples now we're going to look at where the squares are adjacent to each other. So like G7 and H7, these both might be focal squares of attack. They're near to each other, so H7 and F7. We did see, remember, a sacrifice on F7, drawing the king out, and then white coming in and on H7. That's a very standard attacking formation plan. So worth remembering these little patterns. And you can also even say that all the focal points are just the coloured squares around the king. So for example, all the dark squares are weak, so we can try to attack on all those focal points. So there's no, set way. And, we just have to recognize the weaknesses and aim to use them in our opponent's position. So let's have a look at this one. Quite a standard kind of attack here. And to begin with, I would say that G7 is clearly the focal point for white, as after F6, we have the blunt plan of simply moving the queen into that square with checkmate, as I'm sure you can see. And this is actually a very standard checkmate idea we're going to now look at when you manage to get a pawn to F6 and your opponent has lost the ability to stop your queen coming into H6, for example. So king to H8 is the only way to stop the G7 focal point. And after queen to H6, rook to G8, what do you consider is the best way of doing this? And again, one of the reasons I really like Vladimir Vukovic's work is that there's always a little bit of artistic flair to his examples. And, he didn't need to do this example in the way he does, but I really appreciate his little sort of artistic touch that he gives here. And it's clear now the focal point is no longer G7, and as we naturally have talked about, it's moved to H7. As you can see, that is now a weakened square. We're not going to ever checkmate on G7 with a rook, this one, but we can try to aim for, of course, H7. So what is the best way of doing that in this position? And of course, the quicker you can do it, the better. So have a think about that now. And you should be able to find that the answer is this very nice move, rook F3. Talking about this bit of flair. I don't know if white has time to go, for example, the long way round, but obviously wasting tempo gives your opponent chances to defend, which black may well be able to do. And after rook F3, we're getting a rook to the H file immediately. And after something like pawn takes here, we have a major threat. And the threat is not just rook H2, but it's actually queen takes H7 immediately. A very standard queen sacrifice. I've won a number of games like this. King takes the rook coming over here. This is one of those checkmate patterns. If black tries D5 to have the possibility of giving his queen, we don't need to win the queen here, which would mean black could fight on. We should play F4 first. And now there's no way to adequately stop queen H7 and rook H2 in some move order. So a nice simple example of the combination of those two focal points in this position, which is G7 and H7. A more complex example of, multiple focal points, or let's just say a couple of weak squares that we try to execute our attack on. And this diagram given by the author is an instructive use of playing against those, as he says, complex, I say different weak spots in this position, these two squares here. And he gives the lines where we win by basically pressurizing those squares in a simultaneous attack. So the rook is probably going to come round here, threatening to use these two positions. And the first move, obviously, is rook h1 to threaten checkmate in one. And here, the best move is king to g8. Now, there is a subtlety here, obviously, of rook h4 immediately. Bishop takes g3 is annoying. And I should say that if bishop g3 straight away, this is not actually the best move, because after king f3, well, okay, it doesn't really change the evaluation of the position, which is that white's winning. And it's quite funny that actually f3 is the safest square for the king, probably on the whole board. I don't think there's a safer square. If you put the king on e2, which is suggested by Vladimir, then king to g8 and queen e5 becomes a little bit tricky, because the queen has this option of checking on b2. So king f3 avoids that option. And after king g8, which is going to be forced, queen takes f6, queen e5. Now, well, this position we can simply check and take the bishop on g3. And there's no counterplay with any check here. So this looks like it's simply winning for white in the position. So rook h1, king g8. And now white has to consider how to continue in this position. And the move suggested in the original book is not actually correct here. So let's see if you can work out the best way to continue in this position. There's a couple of ideas here, and the winning move that is actually the winning move I think is very nice. It's one of my favorite types of moves. So if you've been watching the course so far, you might get to grips with what the move actually is. And pause now if you need to. Well, a couple of moves we can just get rid of. So it's always nice to come to the correct move, or the move that you have to play in a position, even if it's not that good. Even if you're losing, you still got to play the correct move, which is the move that causes your opponent the most problems. In this position, that's not a danger, but we can discount some moves immediately, shortening, making our range of the move we should play less. And obviously the moves we should discount is rook h4, because now obviously bishop takes g3, and now bishop takes h4, and we get rid of, well, we just lose a piece, don't we? Rook h3 is clearly weak, far too defensive. Remember, the black king is doing this self-defense mechanism, which is, as we stated earlier, one of the problems when we go for the h7 square. The black king is coming to e7. This is too passive. We want to use that rook in the attack, so there's a couple of other options, and Vladimir gives rook h5, but in actual fact, this very clever maneuver, and the idea is to check, play f6, opening up this diagonal. We saw this checkmate with the bishop and queen in an earlier mating pattern sequence. Is not actually correct here. And the reason this is not correct in this position, and we will follow by looking at this, is bishop takes g3 check. And now, after, for example, king e2, the king can go here now. It maybe is safer now this square to stop any potential check here. The author claimed that black cannot do anything against rook g5 followed by f6, but have a little think about this one in the position and try to think how you could try to work against this as black. And this is where hidden defenses really need to be looked at. And here it's what we're going to call later on indirect defense, starting some kind of counterplay in the position. Black has the saving resource here, rook to e8, starting counterplay against e3, which would probably be the same response if your king had gone to f3. And now if we continue with rook g5, well, the idea of f6, it's going to be losing in actual fact for white here in the position. And I think the correct line now is to take here check, and black gets his attack just in time in this position. And you can see with the bishop and queen coming in, black has at least a draw, but it does look like this is going to lead to checkmate. Let's try to work it out a little bit. Maybe here first, or do we go bishop here first, or even something here first? You always got to be careful which checks, but there's no way, anyway, it's clear there's no way white can avoid at least a perpetual here. The queen is going to always be checking around, simply. So that was a good defense, rook e8 in the position. And white could try queen takes f6 here instead, and this is a secondary idea with this one. But after bishop f4, stopping the idea, it's actually white who should be thinking about trying to get the draw now, because black has managed to cover that square and get enough counterplay. So very, very interesting position this, and this is very typical, I feel, for a game. You get to this position, very double-edged game. You do have a win, but it's that calculation and really making sure you are aware of hidden resources, which the author was not in this position. Because if you don't, rather than winning, you will lose, and that could be the difference of a whole point is massive in a tournament. And this is something you really need to train yourself to do. Don't rush into it. Think heavily about all your opponent's possible resources there. And kind of rook e8 was logical because he's always threatening ideas with on the dart squares. So in actual fact, the best way to win is a move I like a lot, and it's the quiet move. And if you play king to f3 in this position, it's this quiet move. If none of the attacking moves work, then why not avoid your opponent's threat in the position? And by avoiding our opponent's threat, which is always bishop takes here and this counterplay idea, we now have quite an easily winning game. It's just a very nice quiet move. And you can only come across such a move if you calculate the possibilities, find out what the essence of the position is. It's always taking here. And then avoid it. The main threat is now just bringing the rook to g4. So if rook h4 is really strong, and if bishop takes g3, the major difference is we can just now take on f6, and we have queen g5 again, and queen takes g3 in this position. So white is winning, and he's clearly got the attack still. So just king f3 is a nice little subtle move there. Did you come across that? If you did, well done. Now, after rook h5, we'll continue with the author's analysis. We know that bishop g3 should have been played, but his analysis goes king c7, and the author goes on to point out this defends the focal point f7, which is relevant in the line where we check and go f6, because remember the bishop and queen, you remember that pattern where the bishop comes around to f7 or the queen comes in? Hopefully you do from the earlier chapter. And again, now in this position, what should white play here? Well, white should again just play some line with king f3 at the right moment. This makes more sense. This is the winning move, to be honest. Now, the line given, b6, is quite clever in the way that it's trying to draw the queen away from f7. Now, if we went rook g5 straight away, we can see why this might be possible. After pawn takes f6, let's say bishop takes f6, you have to get rid of that pawn. And now bishop takes h7. Can you remember this little technique here? The f7 square is key, and we did look at this. If a pawn is not there, we have the way of rerouting the bishop. But if the queen is defending the pawn, we don't have bishop g6, queen h7, queen takes f7, checkmate. Again, another auxiliary focal point. Now it's the f7 square. So b6 is trying to draw the queen away from that square. And now the author gives queen d7, which is far too passive defense. And I think that nearly every top player in this position, or every player really who understands the initiative, should be thinking about creating counterplay. And rather than going for passive defense, if you can play active defense, you should do. So queen c1 is clearly the move that should be that should be the focus of analysis, with rook c2 even coming. And now after rook takes g5 and f6, it may look like white is crushing it, but black does have rook c2 check, first getting rid of the bishop, and now just queen g6, and black is actually winning. So quite surprising that the author misses this very active defense. And again, this just goes through the whole course. Defense, active defense, way to go. But after queen d7, now things change. And here we can now switch back to using g7 as our focal point. Let's remember, checks like this would give black the advantage because the king sits so safely on e7. Let's not help our opponent's king run the way it should go. But now, only now that the black queen has come off this diagonal, and white's ideas are the correct ideas in that we're trying to distract overload our opponent's defensive piece, the queen, away from the diagonal or the f7 square. But the problem here was that in a couple of variations, Vukovic just did not look at the most active defensive moves that black should be playing. And of course, they're the first things you should look at in a calculating possibility. But now, yes, this is winning. These two pawns can't be, these two squares, focal points, can't be defended. And the author goes on to say, an excellent example of the shift of threats from one focal point to another. And black is overburdened with threats. Well, you do see this a lot, but as we've seen, this king f3 move was much more delicate and correct in the execution of the attack. Let's look at these points, these ideas of attack against multiple weak spots, complex focal points, as Vukovic mentions, from a real game situation. And this is the game Sasbo van Sluitinga, Hilversum 1947, and white won in interesting fashion. And Sasbo here has, again, we should evaluate to work out what the right plan should be. And I think it's quite clear to see, even though he's a pawn down, doing some sacrifice along the way, very pleasant position. Strong pawn on e5, meaning a kingside attack is a way to certainly proceed. Queen pointing towards the king, two knights that can jump that way, and a bishop that is maybe even looking at this auxiliary focal point, potential to swing a rook round. What about our opponent's defensive position? Well, it's quite weak. His king is even in the corner, meaning it can't run, so we take that option away, and he doesn't have many pieces over on that area of the board. So we should certainly look at a direct attack here, which is now done with knight to g5. Very, very standard pattern, this one. Bring the knight in to attack h7. I would like to add that if you can imagine, for a minute please, in this position, that if the pawn's back on h2, this bishop is not attacking h3. So just don't pay any attention to that bishop. And this knight on e3 is not there. The reason I'm saying please just imagine this is a very standard formation that I don't feel is mentioned in this book. Starts with knight g5, when the only way to defend against queen h7 is g6 as in the game, because h6 doesn't work clearly. And if you can imagine that thing where these three pieces are not here, the normal continuation is queen h3 attacking h7, that forces h5, and then g4 to break down that h5 pawn. And that's another pattern I think it's well worth remembering. And it can start from a seemingly innocuous position like this, where it doesn't look like there should be attack, and all of a sudden, in the space of 3 moves, you get a checkmate attack. In this case, that's not possible, but now white does bring in his other knight, because he now sees that h7, well, the focal point, is something he can really go for with all of his pieces. And I think it's clear to see that this position is pretty grim for black. And the important thing first, before bringing this knight in, is to play g6, which weakens black's king on this long diagonal, which will be useful in some situations if we can get a queen into the dark squares now. Black desperately tries to swap queens, which would be a complete travesty if we do swap queens, but we don't need this bishop anymore, so you might as well swap off pieces that are not needed. And another reason is that, well, let's play rook c3, gaining a very useful tempo. Now the queen cannot stay on this diagonal, which it might want to do because it has some chance to get back to defend. It has to go to a5, and now a very nice move, you can have a look, see if you can find it, e6. And this is trying to now find another way into the king. Remember, when your opponent has a fianchetto position, if you want to attack, you have to get rid of any bishop there. But if that bishop is removed, the king becomes very weak, especially in combination with knights, two knights here and a queen attacking. This has to be captured, but how do we capture it? If we capture with the pawn, we slip into the dark squares and the second knight can come in with checkmate. And after knight takes, our knight is a better piece than our rook. Our rook is not needed, so rook takes e6, keeping our more aggressive attacking piece is correct. Bishop takes, and the only way black can try to defend, because the knight here, is f6. But now, after the simple knight takes f6, white is threatening either knight e8 or knight h5, and then queen g7 checkmate. So g7 is now the second weak point, the focal point here. And this is a very common occurrence again, knight and queen on this diagonal. It often leads to wins, and nearly always white has some perpetual check by moving the knight backwards and forwards. So here black tries to exchange off that queen. The queen remains on the diagonal, and after queen d6, white now plays the winning move. Can you see the winning move here? Hopefully you can. The winning move is rook takes c7. The last piece coordinates in the attack perfectly. And if queen takes e5, rook h7 is this Arabian checkmate pattern, which I've mentioned before. And after rook takes c7, we're threatening the queen, threatening mate, so black resigns. The next position arose in the game between the author of this course, this book, brilliant writer, brilliant book, one of the best attacking books of all time, and a great player, Vladimir Vukovic, and he's playing against End Zelins from a match. He was from Yugoslavia and Latvia at the 1936 Munich Olympiad. And he has the white pieces here, does our friend Vladimir, but he's got some nasty ideas coming towards him. On the plus side, he's already done the first blow against his opponent's position in the attack on the king side there. And this is often a blow when the opponent has played h6, especially when you've got the isolated pawn. These two bishops can play very well. So here, he needs to gain a bit of time, stop black's threats, and then continue with his own attack on the king. So d5 is completely the right move to play. And the point is, this is a little tempo gainer. Black would like to play knight takes d5 because then this is kept open, so black can create his own threats. But after, let's say, even bishop b5 first, kicking that queen away, and then, let's say the queen moves, for example, I don't know, here, then queen g5, black is in a losing position here. There's no good way to stop this one coming in, or if g6, the queen will find its way in there at some point, or a knight in there. So black has to go pawn takes, and now white's very nice idea. Again, we don't want to allow d4, so knight e2. And this little tempo gain means that the queen can't come in, so it's kicked away from its active square. And our knight is sort of coming towards the black king, and also has a nice square in the center. So queen e6, and now violence was the measure of the day here. Bishop takes g7, forcing open the black king, and this works well because we have three pieces attacking and possibly a fourth one with the rook swinging around. This has to be taken, and now the queen comes in, And another good thing about this sacrifice, which is always nice, as I keep mentioning, is if you know you have a draw in hand, you do here, you can just keep going backwards and forwards, then that's a good feeling, isn't it? You're not committing everything. You know, worst case scenario, you just take the draw because you can't find the win. Now, here, white plays queen h4 check, and the reasoning for this is quite clever. It's giving your opponent the chance to go wrong, and if we play queen h6 check, he has to go to this square. But by playing queen h4, as Vladimir mentions, you're just giving black the extra option of going wrong. And if you can see that you have an extra option where your opponent might hang himself, then you should do that. And the extra option is, well, if he does go to g7, we now have the f5 square with check. And after knight to d4, this comes in. I think this actually occurred in the game. Black did play king g7, so not being aware of anything that happened. And here, black had to give up the queen, but the game is of little interest now. It's clear when the knight arrives here that the queen will be able to come into a new focal point on g7. And this is the two sort of focal points we're concentrating on here. So Vladimir wanted to analyze what would happen if the king goes to g8 here, and some of the variations in this position. When you have two options, you can either try to now bring the queen into h6, or you can bring a third piece into the attack by bringing the knight around. Now, he gives queen to g5 as the main line, but knight g4 is also very interesting. And here, the original book says it should only be a draw, but new analysis later by the team at Everyman conclude it's a win. And even later than that, in 2020, the chessball team have found an even quicker win, which does not surprise me. You've got three major pieces around the lone king, and they're all in very strong attacking squares. We know a knight on f5 is one of the strongest squares, bishop strongest square, queen. It's not surprising me at all. And the latest analysis now states that black has to play rook c1. And in this position, rather than recapturing now, queen g5 check is correct. And this covers the e5 square, first of all, and after a king move, only now playing rook takes. And this is given as, by the chessball team, a win, and they leave the analysis here. The queen is attacked, and we're coming in, and it's quite easy to see this as winning, actually. So that was one way of doing it, but queen g5 and bring the queen to h6 also looks pretty strong. And now this knight d4 move, because we got our queen even closer to the action. So this stops any extra defensive chances, and a check on h7 becomes even stronger now because of that reason. The king can't come up. So I like this one. And now after rook c1, Vladimir gives queen takes c1 an exclamation mark, which is very hard to understand. He's basing this on a little bit of faulty analysis. But in fact, the only winning move here is queen takes, and after queen e5, knight to f5, black is relying on knight to e4 to defend, the queen defending this focal point. But after simply eliminating that one, queen g5, king h8, well, white has rook d1 winning. And maybe this is not the easiest move to see in actual fact, but this move is a winning position for white. It's one of those positions where black doesn't actually have many moves, and to find such a move as this, trying to come into d7 or d8 at the right time, you clearly have to understand your opponent's intentions, but this is not easy to see, because now black doesn't have many moves. This is the whole point. He's running out of moves. I think the main idea is to go here and then use the e7 square for the knight. So you're trying to go rook d7, check, and then knight e7 check when the queen has to give itself up. So it is winning, but not so simple to see. Vladimir gives queen takes c1, queen e5, knight to f5. And his point is there's now an attack at these two focal points. And he gives the line knight h7. Knight e4, not working so well, he now mentions, because our rook is on this square. And now this is like the last line, but rook d7, white is actually a tempo up in the position. And there's no defense against this plan we mentioned. For example, let's show that on the board. This is the winning plan. So knight h7 in this line is the try, but now queen h6, threatening some knight jump and the knight, and black can still defend. And this is the standard defensive idea when you're attacking the h7 focal point. Knight d6, exclamation mark, with the idea of doing our standard checkmate with bishop takes, bishop g6, queen h7, queen f7. And now he gives bishop takes d6, which clearly runs into this checkmate, as we will see. But knight to f8 was still holding on for black, even though after knight takes b7, black must be a lot worse here. That knight in a little bit of danger of being trapped, but not so much. Rook e6. Black is not getting checkmated here, but there's a long way to go until you get the full point. So it's not quite as clear as if we kept the queen in the danger zone earlier on. This is a lot better than bishop takes when the standard checkmate pattern of bishop g6. And remember, when there is a pawn on f7, but it's undefended, this is the standard maneuver and coordination between these two guys. You come in here with mate. So nice ideas there from the man himself. In the second part of this chapter on group focal points, so multiple weak squares, we're now looking at those of the same color, which the author states qualifies as a network of squares. I think we kind of seen this idea before. I kind of call it a different network a little bit to the author, that, for example, you're trying to checkmate on h7. Your opponent has a knight on f6. That knight is therefore connected to h7. If you can eliminate the knight, you can get into the focal point on h7. In this next example, we examined the most typical attack by the queen and bishop against these two squares on f7 and h7, f7 and h7. You can already see here that the bishop on this brilliant diagonal, which black has weakened by h6, and the queen, if it can get on that diagonal at some point, will cause major problems. We have a pawn on e5. We know this is a very good attacking unit. We also have another bishop hitting the h6 pawn. If black didn't have a pawn on h6 here, if it's back on h7, black would have much greater defensive tries, but that's not the case. So queen h5 now, the queen comes in to the position, and the main threat is to sacrifice the bishop on h6 to get rid of this pawn, and then to simply come in with the queen. And what the author mentions throughout this, if sacrifices work, they need the essential preconditions. These essential preconditions are there, which they are in this position. You might even have a rook come around at the right moment. It's difficult now, but we might be able to swap that off. And with our strong bishop, queen, and e-pawn, this bishop sacrifice is certainly in the air at the moment. He gives a lot of defensive moves now, and one of the better ones being rook to e8, because this idea is a good defensive idea. Let's always remember this. When it's clear one side is going for the h7 square, that focal point, it makes a lot of sense to give the black king the f8 square to escape to. So this move makes that common sense. What if black ignores it with something like queen takes b4? This is clearly just showing no sense of danger whatsoever. And now after bishop h6, the queen is also on the wrong side of the board. So this is a very standard checkmate position. And we can see again that if the rook moves to this square now, there's nothing defending f7. So we have the same line we looked at a second ago with the bishop coming in and the queen coming to f7, which you should be aware of now. So clearly the queen should not be going that way. I'm not going to look at all the moves he suggests because there's literally about 10 of them. We'll stick with rook e8. I'll maybe give one more idea, which is f6. Now, this is a way to try and again create another escape hole. So I would say this is the second most natural, but in this position, it's not so good because the escape holes are light square, and our light square bishop and queen are really covering that one. And we can just slip into g6. And we don't even have to sacrifice anything in this position with bishop h6 coming. So f6 just does not work. So let's stick with rook to e8. And here, well, you can build up the attack if you want to, but why would you if bishop takes h6 wins? I mean, if you're in a real game situation, this is like very practical bit of advice, I think. You know, the first move you must look at is bishop takes h6. And you should be calculating that for half an hour. You know, in a tournament, you'd have time to do that. This is why blitz chess is not as good. You can't allow yourself times to do that. So by taking on h6, it does open up the black king. It comes down to calculation. If it works, then you play it. You double check your analysis, triple check, make sure you haven't missed any resources. But if you can't get it to work or you can't calculate, then another decent move would be something like bishop f4 to slowly try to build up. But it's not entirely clear what you're doing next there. So bishop h6, of course. Pawn takes, queen takes. And now there is a checkmate idea of the queen coming into h8. So black needs to do something about that. And the right way to play is with queen e6, the queen trying to defend. And again, we're going for the self-defense king, the king trying to come over. So how do we play here? Well, the move played in the game, queen h7, is strong. But in actual fact, bishop h7 is also doing a very good job here. And now with bishop g6 check, white would actually get nowhere. There's not really anywhere to improve. And we put our bishop in a more loose square there, a square where it can be captured. But in actual fact, if you now play just queen h5, we keep the threat of the bishop moving, and king g7 is forced in this position. And this still keeps the initiative. Maybe this is not actually so good now looking at it again because of queen to h6. So can we do anything there? Let's have a look. So if we go bishop g6 check, maybe, okay, so maybe this does win by putting our bishop here. This is the right way. So let's do that again. So queen h7 we'll come to, but actually bishop h7 just has the added benefit here of doing what is similar to the game. Now it transposes directly to the game with bishop to f5. So we'll have a look at this in a second. So it's the same line as in the game. The bishop check doesn't help. And if we go to the game, we can go very similar to the game anyway. We go check here, bishop f5. Got there. Now bishop f5 is important because we don't want to chase the black king into another square that he's going to improve his defense. But what we want to do, we're not going to do the job now just with our queen and bishop. We need to have another break, and the break we need is e6 in this position to gain a winning attack. And white's queen is best placed on this square. And what can black now play? Well, queen c6 looks as good a square as anywhere else. But after, I mean, if you don't play this one, if you play something like queen b6 here, what should you do? Well, you'd like to play e6 in this position. But this is again, this requires very clever thinking. If e6 again wins, we play it. But in this case, we should, as in all cases, think, what is black going to play next? I mean, when we played the sacrifice here, we had to do the sacrifice then because black would have time to defend. We didn't have to, but it was right to do it. But here, if we look at what black can play, black's actually running out of moves. And this is something you should always think while attacking. And, you know, he'd like to go knight e7, but this is going to make his king in a real box situation. And if we actually just improve our position by bringing one more piece in, it leaves black without an adequate response here. The bishop can't move because we're going to take on c8 and come round and win on c8. And if you do go knight e7, well, before the check, we now play e6 because black's got worse defensive positions. And this is decisive very quickly with the bishop coming in here. So that was a very nice move, actually. Get the last piece in, but whilst doing that, realizing your opponent doesn't have any good moves. Very important when you're attacking. Don't just look at your own attacking moves. You should be looking at your forcing moves, but if things become a little bit unclear, then you've got to look at what your opponent's trying to do. Now after queen c6, we can play bishop e4, and now, sorry, queen c6, and now queen b6. We now have the idea of taking that one and playing e6, which wins, because the threat is e7 and queen h8 in a lot of positions. So a nice little example of the attack there on f7. It ends on f7 because that's where black king kind of runs, or it could end in a lot of lines on f7, but the combination between these two squares. And it shows the great power with having the queen on h6, which happens, as I mentioned before, so many times, and a bishop on d3. These two pieces have great coordination when attacking. And there's various operations you can do in this position to hit f7 and h7. And you can combine these two squares in a lot of examples to create a winning attack, as white does here. But even saying that, white did need a little bit of help from his friends here. So queen and bishop on their own can do the job, but black has defended pretty well in this case by giving himself some running space. So as always, each individual case you need to also make sure you're covered for. We're now going to have a look at what the author calls a network of weakened squares. And this position here is the main focus of that network. And a network in this structure means the dark squares around black's king. And this position, I think you can clearly see, should be winning for white. The bishop here, tremendous piece. And all we need to do is aim for the main focal point, g7. But of course, this g7 square is connected by these other squares as we go. We're going to have a look at various methods that black has to try and defend this, and I think you can see it's just not going to happen. Now, when we're thinking about this network, I mean, if your opponent has ever fianchettoed, lost his bishop, the dark squares are going to be incredibly weak. If we still have a dark square bishop and get it anywhere, set in that position, it's going to be a nightmare, winning nearly always. In this case, the bishop is even stronger because black can't remove it. If black could somehow exchange it off with a knight, then the pawn would still come forwards, but it would be an improvement. You get rid of that bishop, but even that's not possible. So clearly a very promising position for white. And the first defensive try we're going to look at is h6. And black's idea is to bring the king to h7 to try and stop our infiltration via h6. So you can have a think about the best way to proceed here. Let's remember in this position, bishop, queen, rook and pawn are really our key things. I wouldn't imagine need to bring in our reinforcement on a1 here because our position is so strong anyway. Pause now. Well, the best way to do this now is to bring the rook via the standard third rank swing to hit h6 again. We have a lot of time to do this attack because, as we've realized, black doesn't have any defensive or counterplay chances. And after the rook comes here, black's best try would be something like knight e7, trying to come back to defend. We don't really want to swap this knight off because our bishop is just so strong. So what should we play here? Well, it's right to crack the egg open and bring in our queen. And with the queen transferring to the h-file, it is game over, as I'm sure you can see. There's nothing that can be done to stop this, and it's quite an easy win. So if we think about the main focal points after h6, it's this network of focal points. To get to g7, Well, we can't actually do that now, but we can now start with h6. So just always be aware of where the weak squares, your entrance points to your pieces in the attack, are, because they're the squares you need to concentrate your forces on. And we're going to look at another black defense in the next video. In this second defensive try, black plays h5. So he's again trying to use his king as a defensive piece in this position. Our rook swinging idea is still quite dangerous if you combine it with some forcing sequence like rook takes h5 or g4. But the simple approach with queen d2 is also going to do the job. We don't really need to do the rook swinging quite yet. It was probably winning as well. We have to stop as black, the queen coming in here. This focal point is absolutely key. And also not just that one, but now h8. So king h7. And here, a crafty move. Black's only hope is to get the knight around to defend more squares. And we can stop that by just playing our queen into g5. This is the simplest way. And this is where you're combining not just your own ideas, but the stopping of your opponent's ideas. You know, this idea that you've got to be aware of what your opponent's trying to play, and let's stop him doing that whilst improving our own position. And now we have a multitude of ideas. g4, rook e3. After rook c7, again trying to get the knight around here, and there was no other better moves. g4 would be strong, but even stronger is to now bring in the third piece, because this is going to be more forcing when we capture on h5. And if black plays the best defensive try, we've got to keep our dark square bishop as a key piece. And after this one, black can't get the knight back to g8, which would be some defense, for him, because I'm just wondering if we have queen takes there. But we can go, of course, rook takes is best. I just wanted to do it in a queen sacrifice style. And after knight to f5, you're just walking into g4. Because the knight is now defending some of those squares, so we can get it out the way. Rook g8, only try. But now we can take on f5, and obviously rook takes h5 is mate. So in this example, actually, it's the overcoming the light squares in actual fact. So again, the focal point has changed there. It wasn't h6, it's now mainly h5 is the focal point that we need to target all of our attack on, which we did. So again, be aware of which squares you need to get your pieces in on. So what happens if black tries to defend those network of weak dark squares by placing his queen on f8? Well, this is an attempted try, but it's very passive defense, and meaning white has a lot of time to improve the position. And in this situation, our queen trying to come in is going to be met by a defensive move. So as we've seen, actually, in all cases, we need to include that third piece, the rook. And after queen to f8, rook to h3, we are now considering ideas of the queen coming over to h4 as one potential idea. So h6 will have to be played when black is trying to use a secondary defender. But now h6 is very weak and again becomes our new focal point, so we target that one. How can we... It's quite solid at the moment, black's defense. If we try to use our g-pawn, black will blockade. We don't want to ever blockade the position. So what we should do is force that pawn to come forwards. Bishop g5, very clever. And we've created another new focal point. And h5 is actually much harder for black to defend. h6 was defended by two pieces, but h5 is only defended by the pawn, and it can also be hit by our pawn. And queen e2 is the most forcing, because after knight e7, we can violently break through on h5. And the point being, our bishop slips into this square. It's far too strong. And after knight g6, well, I was wrong in the introduction, wasn't I? What is the winning idea now in this position? I always have to be wrong, don't I? Well, the winning idea, because black really has no options. And again, this position, no moves, no counterplay. This works because we're working out what black can and cannot do. And with rook e1, and the rook coming around and queen coming down here, there's nothing that can be done at all to stop this one. Black has no defense. He might have to give his queen up at some point, leading to a very trivial winning position for white. And now we can look at the immediate idea of the knight coming over, knight e7. But this doesn't do anything to cover the weak h6 square and this network. So now we don't need to bring our rook. We shouldn't bring our rook. We should immediately prepare the queen to come in. Knight f5 is clearly met by g4. And if the knight tries to move around to defend, well, it's not going to work. Okay, black has eventually threatened to swap off the bishop, but rook e3. And again, the third piece is the piece that wins the game. We're also threatening queen h7, a nice queen sack mate. So queen to e8. And here, well, with now black being able to defend h6, we do again bring the third piece, which is going to be deadly. And this position actually arose in the last sequence, or could have arisen then, with queen g5. Let's bring that one in. We try to, in some situations, come here. We can play g4 as well. b5, black desperately trying some counterplay. And g4 would be one way to do it, but queen h4 is also nice. We're trying to weaken this pawn. And as we've seen often, h5 is the focal point, the real weakness. We can slip back. We don't even have to do any fireworks here. And if king h7 to get out of rook h5, it doesn't stop rook h5. And in this position, it's f7, which we end up coming into and winning on. The last try is if black's king tries to run away via d7. Our bishop does a good job of making that escape route a little bit harder. And in this situation, well, we may not be checkmating, but our h-pawn is probably going to work and win, because after queen d2, queen h6, we're going to win this one, go g4, h4, h5, and with the bishop here supporting the queening. Okay, it's not checkmate, but it's nearly as bad because black has no counterplay. Example, knight e7, queen takes, queen a4, desperate attempt. And there's certainly no point in checking here because we've got a new focal point, f7, and this is stopping the black king from moving because we take there. So rook e3, bringing this piece in again, looks best. If you want to stop any counterplay at all, you could go rook c2, g4, h4, h5, which is another winning method I pointed out. But Vukovic prefers this way with rook f3. I'm not sure I would have done this because I would have probably got to queen takes b2 and thought, okay, yeah, it's a little bit counterplay now. So now I'm forced to do something on the king side. In the other line, I wasn't allowing this counterplay. That's my personal way. I don't want to allow counterplay if I've got a choice, if I'm winning simply. But here, well, the point is we are winning with bishop takes e7. So of course this works as well. Only move queen a3 to try and bring the queen back to defend. But now bishop g5, hitting f7, and after knight f5, g4 decides the game. So of course it's winning just as well as stopping the queen coming into this square with this rook e2 move. But it's a matter of taste, isn't it, really, at the end of the day? If you could calculate that this was winning, then why not play it? And that kind of brings us to, of some of those dark squares, a little end there. And we're getting near the end of this chapter. So we have kind of left that last position, but with one change. And the change that Vukovic wants to just show us before we totally move on is a position where we've moved the pawn from h2 to h4. Now, this makes things trickier for white because we don't have the main blunt maneuver of putting the rook in front of the pawn, bringing in the third piece to the attack. So we'd rather that pawn was back on h2 in this position because our threats against h7 can only now be made with the queen. This rook can't play a part. But this is also a winning position because we can use this pawn to open up the position, albeit it's a little bit harder. Black should try b5, creating some counterplay. He's got to go for this. And now queen d2, and now black has to cover queen h6. So queen e8, aiming for queen here, is the only way. And even now, we should move our rook in preparation for h5. h5 immediately doesn't really get anywhere, because if we take here, black will take with the f-pawn, and that gives him another defensive idea. The rook can be used on the second rank, so we certainly should not rush that idea, because it gives black a chance to build a better defense. So we should build up, and the idea is to build up first by moving the rook. And this is going to increase ideas now with the h-pawn coming. If h5 is ever played, we always have the break g4. So h5 certainly doesn't block black's position down when this h-pawn at some point will now move, and there's nothing on the black h-file to block its advance. So black, let's say, plays a5. Now, it should be noted that if you can imagine black had another 10 tempo on the queen side, still probably be lost. But this maneuver of white's would still be very scary, actually. But, you know, it would require more thought. In this case, black's counterplay is just so slow. We really don't have to worry about it, especially as his queen is always going to have to be over there to defend any checkmate threats. So now h5 works, b4, and here a very clever idea. Think how you would now increase the pressure more. What would you play? And the next move is really, really key for this example. So do pause and have a think about this position. Well, we know taking on f6 on g6 is just a mistake, because you're allowing this added defense which black did not have with a pawn on f7. In actual fact, black is probably not in such a bad position here. White would have to now break with f5 to achieve anything. So we need to increase the pressure, and this is the case where if we can't do anything with our immediate pieces, and it doesn't look like we can, we should bring in the reinforcement, and in this case the a1 rook is called for, and we now play g3. g4 similar as well. If you came up with this idea, congratulations. There's no way the queen can help, but the idea is king g2 and rook h1. This is the maneuver that I was looking for. Let's say a4. Well, okay, we should always look at what our opponent's trying to do, and all of a sudden he's got a mini threat of a3, which does create some play over there. So let's just stop that. We don't want to give him chances. You've got to look at what your opponent's doing. Don't just concentrate on your own moves. And now after something along the lines of knight a5, we have to move our queen out of the way. The knight comes in, but there's nothing now black can do. Black's done as much as he can. Taking here makes no difference in this position, because he's going to have to move the queen back to defend, and it's just too slow. And now king g2, black is trying to defend with everything, but white is attacking now with everything. And here, how do we increase the pressure? It's not, black's done a good defensive try. If we take here immediately, it's not working, because again, queen sacrifices don't work. Black has the escape square for his king. So we need to look for another focal point. And actually in this position, it is now the f7 square, because that's where the black king's escaping. So we maneuver our rook there. Remember, look where your opponent's aiming to escape. Try to stop that one. We don't want to take here. Big mistake. It should also be pointed out that black can't play h6 here, because we just take on this square and we have rook h8 checkmate. And black can only wait in this position. And now we've got our rook to this square, we can finally open it up for our h-file. And the point being here, can you see the point? We now have this breakthrough move, and it's not surprised that at some point this was going to work. And after king to this square, well, bishop to d8 check is the winning move. So we haven't actually mated in this example, but we are going to win the queen, win the exchange, and our rooks have got in. So it's clearly winning. So this was quite a subtle way of winning, and you can see having the pawn on h4 made it a lot slower. But this idea of moving the rooks behind the pawn, and I especially like g3 and king g2, worked very, very well. It requires careful calculation and understanding that your opponent has not enough counterplay. But the role of the rook's file in the attack is very important in a lot of positions. And in this position, it was certainly key to the successful attack. And do remember that in your own games. To explain this network of weak squares, focal points that are linked, we will have a look at two examples from games, because obviously it's not always going to be as easy as we showed in the last set of examples. This first game, Max Euell versus Floor, Amsterdam, 1939. I do recommend, by the way, if you ever get a chance to go to Amsterdam, as well as checking out the coffee shops, if that's your thing, go to the Max Euell Centre. The Max Euell Chess Centre in Amsterdam really is quite an amazing chess hub, and loads of books, people there with a love of chess. So, you know, it should be there on your tourist list of chess places, as the Good Night pub, the only chess pub in the world in Norway, Oslo, should be. So we can see in this position, White already has his bishop on this lovely, strong square. But things are not as simple, because Black's dark square bishop is defending those squares at the moment, meaning some of our targets should be, well, at the moment, the main one, h7, because we can't really get in on the other targets at the moment, unless we can somehow get rid of that bishop, which is going to be very hard to do. Now, Max Euell, a master of attack, started with the very strong idea rook c5, with precisely that intention in mind, offering the rook to get rid of that bishop. And there's no way Black can capture that one. He went queen takes a2. If he had captured the rook, the king side is now really weak. And after pawn takes c5, we're also threatening the bishop. And the simple maneuver, which I'm sure all of you would find here, is transferring the queen into g7 via something like e3, for example. So the game continued, queen takes a2, and now a very nice, strong maneuver. And again, this is a bit like the examples we're using, that a bishop and a queen on their own are not enough, and a rook swinging idea can work incredibly well. And now, rook to h5. A lovely idea, and this has brutal intentions of even taking on h7, followed by queen h3, or like normal, if we swap those tactical motifs around, queen h3 first. Clearly, it cannot be taken because of queen g3 check, and we've opened up the file. What else can Black play? Black tries e5, which is as good as try as anything, because he's covering the h3 square. Bishop to g7, trying to get rid of our bishop, is an option, but we can now play against different focal points. Well, h7 was one of them, but remember the linking focal point to h7? It was f7. And we've also looked at examples where we take on f7 first, drawing the king away, then take on h7. Again, that sequence can be interchanged. And in this structure, a very common tactic in here, this position here, would be rook takes h7, and now queen takes f7 check. So we're just swapping those focal points around, and on the next move, our rook comes in to h3. We always have bishop f1 to cover the back rank, and this will be winning. Nice little tactic. So after e5 here, White simply plays d takes e5. It's nice we're controlling d8, because that limits Black's counterplay against our back rank, I'd say, mainly by swapping off our rook. The bishop has to move, and now again our rook is in no threat because of the queen g3 move. So now queen f4. It can't come to h3 anymore, so it targets h4 instead. Queen takes b2. And now, just to be sure that everything's covered, because we've got our ideal setup on the king side, bishop to f1. No back ranks. There's no way the black queen can get over to the king side to defend now. The black queen is cut off, meaning the defenses of the black king are not very good. Bishop e7. there was a horrible idea of queen to h4, combined with rook h7. I mean, you could, let's say a5, even play rook h7, check, bishop h6, bishop g5 here. And this is also very scary. Maybe black, in this case, has a chance to defend with this move. So, okay, we swap the move order around. Let's just go queen h4 first. If it's ever taken, our queen slips in and we're going to bust our way through. So bishop e7, and now there's a couple of ways to do it. Rook d3 is a very nice way, bringing reinforcements. And maybe that's even the best way of doing it. But white goes for queen h4. And this is really tough. Black only has one move, and his only move is bishop to c5. And this is a good try at creating some chances against f2. And this stops the immediate threat of rook h7 because the queen takes f2 check. So rook h6 first. We're not rushing at the moment. We can just take on f2 now. And after a5, there's nothing else black can do. Now rook d3, because we're covering our back rank and this extra piece coming over to one of these two squares. Even f3 might be the strongest square for the rook. Just stopping that idea is crushing, because h3 under the control of the bishop here. If bishop c4, black loses control of the h3 square, so now we can take on h7. And if queen takes f2, bishop takes f2, king takes f2, we have this other rook coming across. So black tries bishop takes f2, and this has the idea of transposing into an ending where black is relying on this pawn. So he has created some counterplay here. And unfortunately for black, it takes 3 moves to queen, and even though the queens have been exchanged, because of the dart squares, white's attack is still killing. He goes bishop e2 with the idea of g4 and rook h3. Also, g4 immediately was worth considering with the point bishop takes bishop h3, and this is another way to get the rook over there. But bishop e2, black tries rook a5. If a3, g4, a2, rook h7 gets there in time. So rook a5 and now g4, and this is black's desperate idea. Rook takes e5, but this is really too much material now, as I think it's clear to see. Bishop c4, and now the rook comes to h3 anyway, and bishop takes e2. We keep the control of the dart squares. Rook e6, e5, and Max Euell is not taking his foot off the accelerator. Bishop takes g4, rook takes h7, and after a couple of moves here, black resigns. These pawns, not that scary. One line being white just playing rook to c3, rook takes c6, and the rook just about gets behind in time. Had black had one more tempo here, with a pawn on a3, then black would have very good chances with b2, but that's not the case. And again, tempos, even in positions that look clearly winning, and counterplay. Black tried it, but he was only one move short there, so it was still a little bit tense. But nice win there, using all the themes we've looked at so far. To finish off this chapter, let's have a look at the game Pilnink versus Nyadorf. And this game we're going to take from move 1, and it's the build-up of an attack on those focal points. Some mistakes were made during the course of this game, but I think it's still a good demonstration of the standard way to get in on that network of weak points. The first Caro-Kann I think we've seen so far. And here, well, I would recommend you look at the e5 line, because that fits in with a lot of the setups we will look at, especially in the next chapter, with the bishop coming to this diagonal. Knight c3, obviously another main move, where white gets a space advantage, and now knight to f6. And it's quite funny here that this move was a sideline for a number of years, and only now has it become popular again, mainly actually to the work of such players as Grandmaster David Howe and Magnus Carlsen. Magnus Carlsen playing this one regularly. But previously it wasn't thought so good because black has to double the pawns. I can remember quite a funny story here. An English player, 2250, was playing in a tournament, I believe, in the Czech Republic. And white was Richard Rapport, and he's obviously nervous. It's the first round. And here he played knight d7 with the idea of following up here. Richard played queen e2, and he went knight f6. And this must have been the most embarrassing moment of his life with that checkmate. 2250 falling for that. I think just nerves showing their face. So now knight takes f6 and e takes f6. And the point of this, David Howe explained this to me, saying I should play this line as black. Black does have the double pawns, so obviously white's idea of getting a passed pawn later on is a standard idea. But David's point is you have an extra pawn to defend your king. So when you castle as black, your king should be safer than white's. And you can often start an initiative as black against white's king. So this didn't happen in this game, I'd like to say. c3, bishop d6, bishop d3, castles. And now queen c2 is one of the main lines, but queen h5 was tried now. And here the author gives g6 as a mistake, but this is not so clear in actual fact. Modern theory states that this is okay. And again, the Chessable team just updating the theory here, which you can all see in the book attached to this course. f5 is another way to do it, with g6 coming next. But f5 does, in some ways, weaken black's position as well. With other moves being annoying. So g6 is okay. Queen h4. And it's really the next move which is the mistake, which is c5. And this is said to be fundamentally inappropriate since white is stronger in the center and queen side. And you shouldn't really open up positions of the board where you're weakest. That's what black is doing here. Black is strongest actually on the king side. And black should have left operations on the queen's wing to white and instead prepare for play on the strongest area of the board where he's got the extra pawn, the king side. I mean, nowadays, again, you know, the thing with this book, it makes it confusing for me, as you may have noticed a couple of times when even though I've done my work, I still get a bit confused of what's recommended in the old book, and now and then you've got John Nunn's interpretation and Chessball's interpretation and my interpretation. 4 interpretations. But nowadays C5 is actually, you know, considered not to be so bad. Saying that, I remember David Howe, who I think has got one of the best understandings of chess I've ever met. It says that knight d7 is better, and I totally agree with him with the idea of trying to play for f5 and knight f6 at the right moment, even bringing the bishop to e7 first, so we can cover any points over there and slowly coming forwards on this area of the board. So example, knight e2, and now bishop e7 I like. Let's just make sure we cover those squares, castles f5, queen g3 and knight f6. And you can see that this way of playing to me makes more sense because you've got the extra pawn in that area of the board and you're using it. Your knight has some decent squares and this position looks perfectly okay for black. So c5, knight e2, knight c6, and now bishop h6. And now black plays a big mistake. Rook e8 is certainly not that bad. With this strong pawn formation, it's very hard for white to break through. Remember, black's got an extra pawn now compared to other positions we looked at. But as soon as he plays f5, which we know we can play, but only when we've got our pieces, our bishop and knight, coming to cover those squares. But as soon as we don't have those pieces to cover those squares, this move is weak. Because now you trap the bishop in, and it just seems like white has better ways into the position after bishop g5. Of course, not exchanging queens. Exchanging queens might give white a better position because of his extra pawn in the center, but we get an opportunity to get our bishop to f6. And in these structures, if you can do that, you should really, really go for it. Again, modern assessment here, and the book only really relies on the queen moving, but modern assessment of the position, even in this one, states that a much better move is bishop e7. And I think this is understandable because you can't let that bishop come in. And after bishop takes, knight takes, I think the author ignored this because a pawn takes c5, which looks like it wins a pawn. But in actual fact, with queen takes d3, black has very decent compensation here after the move bishop e6, because white can't castle easily here in the position. And, you know, it's suddenly black who's attacking, and we got rid of some of white's pieces. So this was certainly worth considering. Saying that, white probably shouldn't take on c5, but instead castle queenside. And this, again, even though bishop e7 is playable, I prefer white here, going for an attack rather than a greedy idea. But after queen b6, white is happy to castle kingside. There's no reason to put your king over there. Remember, it's a little bit weak without the c pawn. We're not concerned about this capture here because of our idea of coming in on these squares, and black will be too slow doing that. Now, he captures on d4 first, and let's just have a look, first of all, what could occur if he takes on b2. Well, let's kick the queen away to an even worse square, a3. And now we can use our rook in a standard fashion, but gaining tempo as we go. And after bishop f6, black clearly has very promising attacking ideas. One brutal idea is moving the bishop and then going queen takes h7, and this rook has gained tempo to attack. Black is not doing well in this situation at all. Greedy move, that one. So rook e8 was played. Now bishop e6 was maybe a bit more accurate, trying to stop bishop c4, but rook e8 looks natural enough, except for the fact white improves his pieces. And now you can't go bishop e6 because of d5. And this sets up those ideas on these two corresponding focal points of taking on f7, bringing the king out and coming into this square. So now h5 played by black to stop that plan. And here white is doing very well. But after the next move, he gives black drawing chances. In such an attractive position, one would expect to find a safe and clear way to victory. White has all the necessary ingredients for a success here. Control over the dark squares on the king side in the position. A development advantage, not that move. A development advantage and pieces that can break up the cluster of pawns in the position. And rather than playing rook on ae1, which is trying to bring another piece in, but it is not correct because of the active move that black now plays, white should have simply started to use these squares and placed his bishop on f6. And the simple idea is the queen now has g5, which is going to force the king here. And white has great attack against a lot of these weak positions, a lot of these weak squares. Another threat is to come and take g6. So, for example, bishop e7, and now if you take here, queen takes g6 because of the bishop on this square. So I don't really see an adequate way for black to defend this position now, because king h7 here is not playable, bishop e6, d5, and it doesn't look good. So the move rook on ae1 allowed rook e4, and now white doesn't have the chance to get in as quickly. It's still dangerous though after knight to f4, but the problem with the way that white's played this, you want to play your attack in a way that you give your opponent the least amount of counter-attacking chances, whether that's him creating play on the queen side, grabbing material. And after queen takes d4, you're now kind of committed. You weren't committed before. You could go into an ending because you weren't material down, but now you're material down. So it's kind of all or nothing now. And as the great Alekhine showed us, this is not the preferred approach to attacks. The preferred approach, we'll look at this in more detail later, is a nice solid build-up, building on the position and only attacking when it's correct to do so. Okay, we can do crazy attacks, but that's in positions where there's not another good option. White now takes on e4, and black returns the favour by taking with the pawn. Had he taken with the queen in this position, he at least goes into an ending after knight takes g6, which is possible, but now he gets the queens off. And here, after bishop e6, probably white's better because of the weakened pawns. Well, white is better, but it's obviously game on here. I mean, black is not in such bad shape in this position. I mean, okay, yes, white's better, but it's game on. And I think I would have hoped, most modern players, I think, would play that, because the other option here with 4 white pieces around a weakened king position is it's just easy to see that white has chances. And knight takes h5 is a really nice way to break down that king position. The knight can't be allowed in, so pawn takes, and now the bishop does come to f6 with 3 attacking pieces. You have to stop the queen coming to g5, so queen c5 is the only option. And now another white piece joins the attack, rook d1. Very clever play here. There wasn't anything immediate with your attacking pieces, so you bring in reinforcements with some ideas of the rook coming to d5 or even the bishop to break up the queen's defense. Now king f8 was played. Now what if bishop e6? This is a move that black would like to play because it develops, it breaks the bishop down, and exchanges would help. So this is ideal, but black did not play this because of the clever move. Can you see it? Rook d5. And if bishop takes, just queen takes h5 is the most accurate because black doesn't have any checks. And if queen takes c4, which has some of its own threats, then queen g5, king f8. And now that we're covering c1, we can actually play rook takes here, and our queen comes in with mate. So, still keeping an eye on that back rank, just about tactically okay. So king f8 forced, and now a very good diverting move, because if we can get our queen into the position here, as we've seen, it's winning b4. Moves like this, little distraction ideas on the other side of the board, very easy to miss. But if you can't do anything with your main pieces, you've got to try to play this kind of way. We've seen what happens if the bishop is taken, the queen comes in, and this distracts the knight away from the d8 square, mainly allowing queen g3, another beautiful tactic. If it's taken, the rook now comes in. So bishop g4 is the best idea, and here Pilnik plays rook takes d6, keeping the queens on the board. Knight to d3 was played because if you play queen takes c4, again the white queen sneaks in and defends the back rank. And with queen h6 as a real problem move, black can resign. So knight d3 stops the queen coming in. White therefore eliminates that knight. And here queen c1 has to be played. And black doing the best he can, creating counterplay with rook to c8. It's time to play h3. And now queen takes f1. I hope you spotted this one. It does look scary for white, but only just don't take that one, rook c1. Just put the king as somewhere like this. Queen c1. And now taking on g4 and taking here. And after the check, king g3, f3, white has gained a winning position. He's consolidated his extra piece. A very tense game there. Very nicely played by Pilnik, who could have, of course, played better, but in general, very, very good play. And he used the gradual build-up there of, shall we say, slow, on the king side of, he saw that there was preconditions for an attack on the opponent's castle king. He got all his pieces involved in the attack. He worked the dark square network with his queen and bishop. And very useful, I think, to learn similar attacking techniques in these kind of positions. So that brings us to the end of this chapter, focal points. I'm sure you will now look at them in a much deeper way and hopefully understand when to spot the squares that you should be attacking when you play your own games. So good luck with that, guys.